friends, welcome back to another episode of the unofficial companion podcast to HBO Max's hit show Industry. I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
And we are the Wall Street Skinny, two former investment bankers who had a front row seat to the global financial crisis, me working at Lehman Brothers at the time and Kristen working in CDOs at Morgan Stanley. We're here to break down everything in what might just be the best episode of your favorite show. And we're going to give you the skinny on what's real and what's Hollywood. This is season 3, episode 7, Useful Idiot. Now, in the last episode, we saw Yasmin being used by Harper and Petra as the useful idiot, giving them the access and information necessary to enact their big short of Pierpoint and setting up the stakes of Pierpoint as effectively Lehman Brothers during the global financial crisis. But given Yasmin gets fired at the end of the last episode, I have no idea whom they are referring to as we head into the episode. I think it becomes very clear as we get going. And it starts off midstream, if you will, with Eric in motion heading into the office.
So they open up and everyone is in tuxedos. They have some 150th party for Pierpoint. Adler calls Eric and says, "Do you see Pierpoint's stock price today? Have you had a drink?" And Eric replies, "Would you blame me?" And he's complaining. He's like, "They were serving Prosecco." Adler goes, "They couldn't afford champagne." But anyway, Adler tells Eric to come up to the 13th floor immediately, where they're all gathered in a conference room trying to game plan and figure out what they need to do. So
may I note that in America, very rarely do office buildings have 13th floors because we consider it to be a bad luck number. So I don't think it's an accident that they're having this meeting on the 13th floor. Most executive offices would be much higher up anyways. So it's ominous that they're on floor 13 anyway.
I will say, I was looking at the market cap and it said the market cap was $15 million, which that doesn't make any sense at all. I feel like that was like a Bloomberg fail. Yeah. So I looked to see where was Lehman? And again, when it collapsed, it was at 639 billion in assets. Their liabilities was 613. And I don't know if someone was trying to assets equals liabilities plus equity. So anyway, Rishi goes up to Eric and he says, "Why didn't they cancel this party? I haven't seen a day this bloody since 08, which not entirely because we did have SVB and the first for public banks, Credit Suisse. There have been some huge things that have gone wrong, but
not on that level.
Fair. And Eric says, "Don't go home. Don't go to the party, whatever you're long or short. Take profit because come tomorrow, people may not be trading with us."
Okay, so may I pause right here? Because this was actually very perplexing. His exact words were, "Whatever's left on the desk books, however you're axed, long, short, get rid of it now. We've got 1 hour of US trading left and you need to trade Asia. People might not be trading with us come morning. Book any profit, take any loss, clean house." Now, I didn't immediately understand why Eric wants him to close up his book. His book isn't the one with the toxic positions in it. Those are all private equity things.
Right.
And again, we have seen Rishi be all traders. He's got rates, he's got FX, he's got equities, publicly traded stocks. But to be clear, when Lehman was going under, you might have been trying to book any profits, but it wasn't clean house, get out of these positions. Other counterparties may frantically have been trying to get derivatives off their books that they had on with us. So remember, prior to the global financial crisis, derivatives were bilateral. So it was two counterparties facing each other. And then they were governed by something called the CSA, which stands for Collateral Services Agreement. And basically, those were the secured liabilities that the bank had, bringing us back to the whole thing that it was senior secured debt that the bank had issued. That was the problem. So what happened when Lehman did go under was all of a sudden, let's say you had an interest rate swap on and you're Morgan Stanley and I'm Lehman Brothers, Kristen, and I owed you $10 million on that position. I go bankrupt. You're out $10 million that probably was offsetting something you had on the other side. So it was this terrible chain reaction. So what happened in the days immediately following the bankruptcy is all of the banks like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs had to bid on these giant portfolios with net present values in the billions of dollars, where you had to step into off-market positions because Lehman all of a sudden went kaput. And that's why most derivatives are now cleared through clearinghouses these days, except for corporate, but that's neither here nor there. But it just, I asked two traders about this. I was like, "What, does this make sense?" And they were like, "No, not really. They might be trying to find any money, right? Digging under the couch cushions in Rishi's books to try to end up fine. But it wouldn't make sense to book any loss that. That didn't make sense to me as a plot point in this episode.
Eric replies, "The bell is tolling." And then this is where you see the industry opening credit come. So it does come earlier this time.
Comes because less than a minute into the episode to give you that really fast pace.
Okay. So Eric and Adler walk in. And so Eric asks how bad it is. And Adler says, if we're talking about Pierpoint stock, the price is going to be in cents, not dollars soon. He says the debt that they issued to fund this ESG pivot has matured and our creditors are banging down the door for the money that isn't there. Typically, by the way, what would happen is you go out and you refinance. So like you basically either, go back to the same person. You're like, can we extend, like whatever. Or like you go out, you raise new money and then you use it to pay back. There's no money now to come in because they can't refinance. So Eric asks how close they are to declaring bankruptcy. Adler says hours. The council are working avenues for a capital injection to buy us a stay of execution. And then you hear someone say, I haven't seen a price action this aggressive since Lehman Brothers. So again, Lehman Brothers, 2008, Lehman Brothers. And by the way, remember they're an American bank. So they all sit down at this like giant conference room table.
They've got a war room set up that they were just camped out in.
And somebody says he's about to come on. So we're not sure who they're talking about. A voice comes on the phone and they say, you have the assistant secretary. So the guy on the other end says, seems to position yourself as a lender, buyer, and seller, like JP Morgan with WeWork. By the way, you guys can go back and listen to our WeWork episode. We do have a whole run through of the WeWork story. But anyway, Wolsey says, yeah, one-stop shop.
We now meet Tom Wolsey, by the way, whom we haven't met until now, the new CEO of Pierpoint, who's running this conference call and standing at the head of the table, which makes sense. He's the CEO of this whole meeting. But I think who's at the head of the table throughout this episode changes. And it's very important to know that he starts there.
Yes. And so the guy says, and you didn't think this was inappropriately high risk? Tom says, or what he said, incestuous.
Tom goes on mute and says to the room, and incestuous. Yup, for the record, I think it was.
Because he wasn't there. Exactly. He was just coming in.
This is his mess to clean up.
Yes. Exactly. But he's like, this is a disaster. Yeah. And he says, but when he goes back off mute, he says, but we liked the risk reward. In hindsight, not so much. We're looking for an emergency cash injection around $15 billion to plug the hole and give us this chance to restructure. Now, by the way, it's 8 p.m. UK time. He says, our share price is 45. We need to resolve this before the US market open on Friday, 2:30 p.m. UK. Really quickly, just because I think this is really interesting. This is positioned off of Lehman-ish, but also it is so much about Morgan Stanley as well. By the way, I was looking into both of the writers. They both worked at Morgan Stanley at one point. Morgan Stanley got a $5 billion, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, a $5 billion injection of cash from CIC, which is China Investment Corp, in 2008, and then again from Mitsubishi to the tune of about $9 billion. So for a total about $15 billion, which, by the way, did stave off them going bankrupt, going the Lehman route, or, by the way, being sold. They still are an independent company. So much of the story is like half Lehman, half Morgan Stanley. And so that's why this is like so fun for Jen and I to do this, because it's like, ooh, and we get to tell war stories. But anyway, the guy on the other end says, I don't have the reach or the influence to advise here. Tom is frustrated. He's like, you're the assistant secretary of the Treasury for Financial Institutions, Graham. If you don't have the authority to do your job, I want to speak to someone who can. And so the guy then says he's going to pull the Treasury secretary out of her 3 p.m. Adler then motions to Eric. Then he wants to like talk privately to him for a second. And so he says that like he can't not be seen at this 150th like celebratory party that's going on. Like people are going to notice if he's not there. So he tells him that he's going to go try to make an appearance. And Eric says that he can basically stay, that their voice speaks with the combined authority of half a century of the firm. Basically like, you're going to leave, but I can speak for you. As he also has like a moment where he kind of is not able to remember something because remember, he does have this terminal cancer. And Eric replies though, he says, let's not let them sell our soul just because there's a gun to our temple.
Adler says this is an existential moment. There are multiple possible outcomes here. Like, again, they're setting up these stakes where Adler and Eric are talking about the soul and the history of the company and keeping up appearances. They seem to think this is going to end with Pierpoint staying intact, with their reputation staying intact. The idea of going to a party to keep up appearances as the head of sales when you're going bankrupt in the next room is insane unless you deep down are like a true believer in the firm. So I think that they are positioning Wolsey as a like, I'm here to fix the mess that you guys made. I don't really care how it gets done. And they're positioning Eric and Adler as the people who really deeply care about Pierpoint, the institution. So I think that that's an interesting little setup that they're trying to do here. And we'll see how that all plays out.
Which also makes sense because to your point, they've been there for like 50 years of their life. And like this other guy just came in yesterday. So next scene now we're with Yasmin. She's in a meeting with Denise, remember the lawyer, and the person Rose, who's like, I guess the head of Hanani Publishing. And they sit down And Rose says, we've spoken with Hanani Publishing Board and decided unanimously that we're going to take care of the damages. We all just want to move on. And yeah, as you can see her, she breathes this like huge sigh of relief. And she says, this is Rose talking, by the way, I'm sure you can empathize, but our PR team is working round the clock to stage manage this. And what we're getting is the press want a public face for the scandal. And Denise replies, a dead one doesn't work. I mean, she's been through enough. And the woman says, we'd like to brief the press that you knew about the embezzlement and were its main beneficiary. Now, they won't be able to finger you from a legal standpoint, but it will be good. And Denise jumps in and says, you want her to wear the fucking scarlet letter? Do you know how this country works? They'll hang her out as a fucking effigy. And the woman said, it's a lot of money, many millions. And in the real world, there's caveats and stipulations to that kind of money. Yaz says, but they'll flay me. They're going to love it. I didn't know any of this. Like, come on. And the woman says, honestly, it doesn't particularly matter. The truth isn't important. What is important is what's expedient. Yaz's lawyer says you can't force her. And the woman says, we're paying back the families. It's the decent thing to do. And the lawyer does try to stand up for it. It's like, you want to shame a girl who has nothing to the point of never being able to return to live a normal life again. You're okay with that? And the woman replies, those are the terms. The alternative is the legal route. It's like, we'll see you and you have no money. And the lawyer says, you know how the story ends for young girls who are hounded by the tabloids, obviously referencing Princess Diana. And the woman says to Yaz, accept the money, accept your family's culpability, and get on with your life. And Yaz just replies, what life? So there was a couple things that I thought was interesting. Obviously, they are setting Yaz up a little bit of almost like, obviously, she feels backed into a corner. She is asking what life, kind of mirrors the Henry thing where they're talking about him like possibly wanting to end his life. There's been like that sort of suicide element. But then also, I don't understand why they would need to finger her and not go after like her mom, who's still there, or Maxim, who we see later, who was like involved with, like, why the daughter, not the wife? It's not like she was an orphan and she's the only person in the family. There's like lots of other people who are much more involved in this company. So it didn't make sense to me why they would need to go after her. And one of the readings that I had later, and I don't know if you had the same thing too, I wonder if they were actually almost like this was almost orchestrated by newspaper guy trying to set her up in these dire straits so that she has no other place to turn. Because why would they need her? Why does the press need her? And I almost think it's like
a really good read. I actually didn't think of newspaper guy. Alexander Norton's
yeah.
His name and can place him.
He's the proper name.
I think that that's a very legitimate read. I think there's also a very set of parallel circumstances that they're setting here. Not trying to equate like this awful thing where there was like manipulation of young women, sexual assault, all these terrible things that happen with Charles Hanani and his abuse of all these women. Not trying to equate those with the global financial crisis. But the way it felt during the global financial crisis to us at Lehman, rightly or wrongly, was it was like, someone's gonna get punished. Who's it gonna be? Someone needs to get fed to the wolves. And listen, Dick Fold pissed a lot of people off. He didn't take offers that like, he didn't think the terms were good enough. Like there were a lot of missed opportunities for Lehman to be saved. And eventually it seemed like, well, somebody has to go down and be the face for all of this. And it's going to be Lehman Brothers. It feels like they're almost setting up a parallel for this with Yasmin. That like, hey, someone's got to be the face of this. You're the young, beautiful heiress who lived this glamorous life. We're going to feed you to the wolves as restitution for what your father did. Because Rose says, right, the truth doesn't matter at this point. And the truth of the matter during the global financial crisis was that all the other firms had the exact same leverage ratios, the exact same toxic assets. They got deals done with the help of the government, right? Bear Stearns was sold to JP Morgan, Merrill was sold to BOA, Wachovia was sold to Wells, AIG got bailed out, everyone else got rescued. And all the banks, by the way, after Lehman Brothers, they had like their emergency capital injections and things like that. Someone had to take the fall. So I do wonder, and again, I'm not saying like Lehman was so wonderful. Obviously I'm biased, but that's how it felt. And I think that's how Yasmin feels. And to your point, right? Everyone else in her family is equally culpable. And her mom probably knew way more because guess what? She divorced Charles. So I'm totally with you that like it does seem very unfair. And didn't Yasmin have a brother in like episode 1 who was in business with her creepy boyfriend? Doing ketamine or whatever. And it doesn't really matter. But I thought they were trying to set up those.
I think it was Seb's brother. But I think it was Seb's brother.
Okay, got it.
But regardless, her mom is alive and like her mom is around and Maxim is her like cousin who was literally wheeling and dealing with her dad and definitely knew much more than she did. So the fact that they're like, we need to pick this like whatever pretty girl who like happens to have been in the tabloids. I'm like, why do you need Yasmin? That doesn't make any sense.
And to your point with the parallels with the Epstein case, you can't pin it all on a dead person. People are still out for blood and people want someone to look at. So yes, you have Ghislaine, but that's not enough. People still want more smoking guns and more people to, as I said, hang an effigy. So I do think there's that parallel that you had noted in the last episode as well being carried through here.
Well, and again, Ghislaine, I think is like absolutely freaking, I think it's a known thing. She is 100% guilty.
She's guilty. She's in jail. She's been convicted.
Yes. But that's why I thought it was so interesting that Yasmin's dad dies the same way that her dad dies. So I think that the writers did that on purpose. But all right. So then next scene, we're back at Pierpoint and you have Sweepy and Anraj who are just like wasted. And they're asking Rishi, who's clearly dragged them out of the party. They're like, why are you taking us out? And Rishi's like, have you noticed that none of the top brass are here? The CEO and CFO were meant to be in London. Where are they? Guys, they're upstairs. And so you can see, by the way, that his arm is in a sling. Sweepy hits Anraj on the shoulder and she says, I told you we haven't seen a cleaner here in 2 days. And Rishi says, those at the bottom get fucked first. But listen, I'm working for an off-ramp for us. We're going to be a pod on the buy side. So that's like not like a podcast, but again, people obviously know like the little pods at like the Citadels and blah, blah, blah. By the way, that would be a good name for if anyone is like literally on the buy side, like pods on a pod. Anraj then asks Rishi about his arm. He says, it walks into a door, which is the same answer he gave when he like had his face bashed in. And Rishi says, look, get on the phones with every position I have. Senior secured, AAA, triple B, jewels, junk, the lot. Eric's mandated it. I'll work our lifeboat. And by the way, so now he's basically selling credit instead of being his like, whatever. Rishi leaves and Sweepy asks Anraj if he believes Rishi and whether he would work on the buy side. I feel like everybody goes onto the sell side to work on the buy side. So I thought that was a funny comment. And Anraj says, ultimately your prognosis is we're dead anyway. And Sweepy nods. Anraj says, look, if this place is burning down, he's still our boss, right? Because he basically wants to actually sell off those assets and do what he was told to do. And Sweepy says, no, what is the point of making this desk P&L look good if this goes under? It's deck chairs on the Titanic. Come on. We could commemorate the last birthday by getting wasted. So I wanted to pause here because Jen, I know you have told the absolute opposite story about people who were quote unquote at the bottom and the janitors.
The janitors. Yes. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity because this is a huge sticking point of mine. When Lehman was going under on a Sunday night, the janitorial staff had come in and changed the trash bags, something I had intimate personal experience with, and I will share that at a later point in the story when it's more appropriate. But these people were the absolute salt of the earth. And thinking back to the scenes with the shoe shine guy, I feel like so sad thinking about how clearly they let that guy go. They've let all that. That's actually not what happened at Lehman Brothers. Now, I don't know if they were like still getting paid. I don't know how, like, I just don't know anything to that extent. But yes, it never would have smelled bad. Those people were going down with the ship just like we were.
All right. So then next scene, we see Harper on the phone and she's talking to Rishi and she says, how many people know that Pierpoint's 150th birthday is awake? And on the other side, you see Rishi saying, he makes some like soccer reference, but he uses the term something like boss man, which I think is like, which is like coming in and doing something, but she hears boss man and she's like, we're not hiring fund managers. If you want to say the actual quote, because again, I was just like, what does this mean? And then, but you can tell it's like the American not understanding the like the terms by the
Rishi says, how do you fancy a trequartista as elegant as me on a Bosman? And Harper says, a boss man? We're not hiring new fund managers. Okay, Bosman deal is a trade for soccer or football players where you don't basically have to pay the old club that they're leaving a giant fee. So what this is referencing is when senior people like Rishi leave banks, the deal that they strike with the buy side typically involves like some kind of guarantee and a buyout of all their deferred, which for an MD like Rishi would be very substantial, likely some combination of deferred cash and stock. Although with the precipitous drop in Rishi's, deferred valuation as the stock price goes down, he's 50% less expensive. So what he's saying is she can get this amazing talent on the cheap because he'll just come over. She doesn't even have to, and like, that's all. So that's what they're saying there. And I think it's actually really funny that like she doesn't get the joke. And I mean, I had to look.
Which I wouldn't get the joke either. I'd be like, oh, you're saying boss man. I do the same thing. Because again, she's from New York. So Rishi says you need an execution guy, someone who can look at flows, levels, make sure that you're not mistiming things and losing levels. Harper says, really? Aren't you overqualified? You're not desperate, are you? Because back to what we have had this conversation so many times about this idea of a trader in the sense of someone who is actually taking risk versus someone who's just like booking the trades. And so when people hear the term trader, it can mean two things. And so I, from the sort of banking side, always thought of a trader as literally just like the execution guy. Think about if you're on an equity long short desk, you are sitting down, you are doing a robust analysis, you're like looking at the financials, you're running a valuation, and then you are making a calculated decision about like, I want to buy this amount of this. So then you go to your trader and the trader will go and they will actually like execute whatever. Now, that is different than what you tend to think about as a trader who goes to like, say, a macro fund, who is actually, they're the ones like managing the risk and like they're making quicker decisions. They're not sitting down and like building a freaking DCF. It's such a different thing. But the trader is more of like, again, that risk taker. And so that's what Rishi is now. Again, like, even though he technically shouldn't be taking the amount of risk that he does on the sell side, but versus what Harper is saying, you're just like purely an execution guy. That's beneath you. You are a risk taker. You're not someone who just wants to be booking the trades. I tell you what to buy and you just hit like buy. You want to be the one who's actually making the decisions about what to buy and sell and when.
Rishi would basically be taking a huge step down. The exit through the gift shop for many people on the sell side who are junior is to go to a hedge fund in an execution role. And by the way, these macro hedge funds also have execution teams. I know a lot of portfolio managers who came from the sell side who went to the buy side and were told, here's the team. Please use this team that we pay to execute your trades. And the portfolio manager was like, I've executed every trade in my life. No way in hell am I trusting this to someone else. I will not, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be talking to people who are in their 50s, 60s, who've been portfolio managers for decades, who all still executed all their own trades. But like, yes, you're 100% right. The idea that a managing director, risk taker, would go to a hedge fund as an execution guy would basically be, I mean, it would be like Messi going to play on my 7-year-old soccer team. It's such a step down. So what we're seeing is that Rishi is incredibly desperate to be offering that up. And also, by the way, with Harper, who is waking up, getting out of bed. She's got like some guy in her bed in the middle of the night and she has her 25 screens up and she has one position, right? The one position is Pierpoint stop. Like she's not going to know when to take profit or stop out. And by the way, the idea of stop out, okay, that's not happening soon. We can literally see on her screen that she's up $300 million on the trade. Yeah. So like the next conversation, like she does not need Rishi watching this position for her. What she needs is more inside information from him.
Right. Rishi says, all right, final offer, quid pro quo. Chatter's Leviathan Alpha is short, Pierpoint in size. I can give you live missive from the Madhouse to help you manage when to take profit and when to stop out. Harper says, keep me up to date and maybe we're talking. Rishi says, and I want to take 2 smart, cheap juniors with me. Sweet pea and Onraj. If you're a serious fund, you need to grow. And Harper says, I forgot you were a family man. Speak soon. She hangs up. And then she's, by the way, like living in a hotel again, clearly, because the guy who had brought her food is the person who she like seems like she was sleeping with. And he says, you know, shall I knock again tomorrow? And she goes, no, thank you. And then he like wheels the food out. But back to season 2, where she was like living at the hotel. She's living at the hotel again. It was Robert who came and took her out of the hotel. And then because of this whole blow up with Yasmin, it's interesting that she's like back in that place, but it's like from such a power position. You see like the 6 Bloomberg monitors and like the massive setup similar to what Jesse had. But anyway, so next scene, we're now with Robert and Yaz. And Yaz asks, has Harper fully moved out? To which he says yes, without a word, by the way. So like somehow she moved out and she didn't even say anything to Robert, who was like always so good to her.
He was always kind to her. But remember, Yasmin dug in the knife in the last episode about Robert always chooses me. And I do think that stung Harper more than she wants to admit.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's funny. We had a thing where it was like, what's the word you say more than anything? And it was 100%. So every time I'm like finding myself about to say that, I like try to stop. I'm like, yes. So Robert then tells Yaz to lock the back door in the sense that he's going to be leaving and he's going on a trip somewhere. And she's like, well, wait, where are you going? Like, why are you leaving me? And he says, don't tell Pierpoint, but I have a job interview tomorrow in Wales. So he sees a bunch of old pizza boxes. Like she's just, it actually goes back to, again, the Harper thing, but only now it's Yaz who's in that position.
Yeah, I like
you know, with like, just like, she's like wasting
the old
away.
Takeout containers and
And he says, when was the last time you left the house? And she says, there's 5 paps outside. And Robert looks out and he's like, no, there's not. She's almost like, I don't want to say going crazy, but she's so paranoid now because she's just been, you know, hounded. And so Robert is kind of like,
it's like her excuse that she gives herself. Like, oh, if I go outside, everyone's going to photograph me. And he's like, no one cares. Like, you're just doing this to yourself.
Yeah. And so Robert then is like, what if you come with me? You know, a change of scenery. And she says, I don't see a way out. Robert says, a change of setting really helps me when I'm agitated. And then Yaz sees a call from Maxim come in and then she agrees. And so reminder again, we talked about Maxim a little bit earlier, but he's like the cousin, whatever, who like worked with her father, who was like his money man.
I don't think he's her cousin. Like, right.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Good
but
point.
I think they were old family friends for sure.
Family friends. That's what I meant. But oh, wow. Yeah. I hope they're not cousins. Yeah. Okay. Never mind.
There's this one line that Robert says that I looked up because I was like, this must be a famous quote. And it wasn't. He says, let's mistake the open road for freedom like all culture teaches us to. And that's not a quote. That's just a line from this show. And I love that. The idea that like this road trip is going to like open up all these new horizons for them and totally clear the air and change their lives. I really, really loved that because that is such a trope in all movies and books and everything like that. And I was like, oh, good job, guys. Like that's for all I complain about the Shakespeare quotes, that was a beautiful little piece of writing that they just threw in there that I don't think is a quote anyways, because I Googled it and I was like, what is this from? And people in the industry. I was like, okay.
Love it. So next scene, we're back at the Pierpoint boardroom and Tom Walsey asks, who is this? In reference to Eric, who is there. In this case, Adler's right-hand man. Like Adler is bringing him into the room. And so Adler says
Eric
he
does
has
not actually have a seat in this room.
No. And that's, I think, even as a partner. And I think that's such a good point that, again, Adler was actually almost helping to drag him up and felt like he was this confidant. So he says he has 30 years at Pierpoint, cross-asset sales, closest thing to a loyal lieutenant I have. If Pierpoint has such a thing as institutional memory, Tao is it. And Tom says, well, how important is history to us today? Eric says, value is determined by history, which is indivisible by legacy. Institutions like ours don't just pop up overnight. Too big to fail isn't an insult, it's a compliment. Our global interconnectivity and sheer size are hard won. Let's make sure we let prospective buyers know that and value us accordingly. But Tom says, you're putting yourself at the center of history. Humble of you. And Eric says, not at all. I'm putting Pierpoint at the center of the economic history of the 20th and 21st century. And so Tom says, so your purpose here is to belabor how Pierpoint is a star in the American flag. And Adler pipes in to say, we're an American bank. Tom, by the way, has a British accent, and Eric and Adler are obviously American. We know Eric started out in New York. And Tom says, I need practical thinkers who present workable options for me, not zealots. We then hear the ding on the phone, and they say, please hold for the U.S. Treasury Secretary. And then a voice comes on the phone saying, Tom. He replies, Madam Secretary. And Jen, I'll let you like give the, this was great because you had said that you liked this scene.
I loved this scene, but even just to go back a second to talking about Eric's language here, talking about this institutional memory and all of this flowery prose that he uses to talk about where Pierpoint is in history. And Tom is just like, what are you smoking? Like, this is a bank and we're going to do whatever it is that like lets us live another day. I don't care about your history, whatever. Let's stop aggrandizing all of this.
Yeah.
I just want to find a solution. I need practical people, not people who, you know, are jockeying for power and influence and all these things.
But it's like, Eric is clearly just taking his signal from Adler. It's like he's like a freaking chameleon and he's just like sort of doing whoever he thinks will protect him. He's being like a sycophantic mirror. He's mirroring what Adler's doing. 100%. And so I don't think it's because he believes it, you know, it's because he's just trying. Do you do?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, well, we'll get to what Eric really believes at the end of the day. I think Eric thinks the way to win at first is this kind of classic sales shtick, right?
Yeah,
We are so great. We're amazing. And just by exuding that confidence and like showing how wonderful we are to all these prospective investors or people who are going to help us, they're just going to want to do it, right? It's just like Rishi. I use my language because otherwise clients will run me over. Like talk to any trader, they'll tell you that. And so I do think that there's this, what got me here is what's going to get me where I need to go attitude from Eric. And Tom is not buying one word of it. It's like Eric immediately hits that wall when he runs up against Tom. There's a huge clash of personalities there. So I think, to your point, there is this realization for Eric that like potentially this kind of flowery prose is going to be what like saves the day. But so the Treasury Secretary, we get this woman who is just absolutely fabulous. She reminds me of, if you've ever seen Monsters, Inc., like,
yes,
you know,
the
like,
one who's at the
behind the desk. Like, that's exactly what she reminds me of. And so I think she's supposed to be Janet Yellen.
That's what I was. Yeah. Who, by the way, Brown alum.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So she's like on this elliptical machine. She got pulled out of her 3 p.m., okay, her very important meeting as the Secretary of the Treasury to be on an elliptical machine. And by the way, to your point about British versus American, okay, we have this big problem. Who are we calling? We're calling the American government, not the British government, to bail us out, Tom. So let's call a spade a spade here, okay?
Yeah. And she says, I don't want to waste your time. The Treasury can't offer you a solution. Not today, not tomorrow. Tom says, you of all people understand the risk if Pierpoint collapses. We dropped another 10% last hour of U.S. trading. Surely the lesson from 08 is that the administration should act early to stop the contagion, right? Not let Lehman collapse. Like, don't let the bank collapse. And the U.S. Treasury Secretary replies, tell me, where were you in 08, Tom? If I remember correctly, I was the vice chair of the Federal Reserve and you were what? Singing a cappella at Yale? So I literally have written here, this guy's younger than us? This guy does not look like he's under 40. I am sorry.
That's what cigarettes will do to you. That's always on the nicotine patch.
So the woman then says, the lesson from 08 is no more bailouts. Tom says, we're not asking for TARP scale relief here. And we're going to come back and talk about that. 08 happened. Moral hazard isn't a thing. Nobody will care. We're asking for less than a tenth of the packet. The Treasury Secretary says, you are out of your mind if you think we are going to be putting our hands into the coffers for a financial institution in an election year. And I love how she says that. So someone then says, pull on her heartstrings. It's worth a shot. And Woolsey mutes and he replies to the guy who said that, she's a Democrat. She pretends to have a heart. He unmutes and he says, think about what you're doing. The only person you're hurting is the man on the street. The people on the pavement foot the check. The people you're supposed to protect. And the Treasury Secretary replies, and in the immediacy, the person who's footing the check eventually does not want to know they are footing it right now. It's an election year. And so he replies, you'll gladly let us fail. And she replies, you're all salary capitalists, right? Order some Chinese takeout and find a solution. Tom tries to reply, I think the president, ... She jumps in saying, the president still thinks we're at war with Japan. Goodbye and good luck. And she hangs up. Again, clearly based off of Biden. And then Tom sits down and says, so much for too big to fail. Let's pause here. Let's pause here.
Before we get to the next one.
So
I know you have a lot to say about TARP. Do we want to talk about it now?
Well, TARP stood for Troubled Asset Relief Program. And basically what it was is what people think of is these quote unquote bailouts for the banks. Really what it was is that the government was giving an investment, a capital injection to these banks, but it wasn't for free. It would be like going to a bank and getting a loan, except for it was in the form of what's called preferred equity, which by the way was structured similarly to how Warren Buffett invested in Goldman Sachs. It was similar to how Mitsubishi, we'll talk about, invested in Morgan Stanley, but it wasn't free money. Now, it could be like in the sense that if you went to zero, the thing with preferred equity is there's a difference between preferred equity and debt. Debt is money you give to somebody, and then if they don't pay you back, it's an event of default. Preferred, you give money to someone and they pay coupon. It's a dividend similar to how debt works, but there's no principal repayment. It's just that you now have ownership. And usually then there is the option to convert into equity. So if things go right, you ride that upside. But if things go poorly, you are kind of shit out of luck. So they were giving this capital injection, which by the way, restored confidence in the banking sector. And then because these firms then did well, the US taxpayer made money on this TARP bailouts. That's why I always am like, it's not a bailout, it was a capital injection. Now, I will say that the actual dividend percent was relatively low, below like what you would expect market would be. But by the way, and I'm going to get into the terms of the Mitsubishi investment in Morgan Stanley, like those were also kind of below market too, because it was seen as a strategic investment. So I just think that it was such bad marketing to call it a bailout. And by the way, all these banks, aside from, because Lehman had already collapsed at that point, and the rest of the banks, for the most part, did recover and the US taxpayer made money. So anyway, it was a way to restore confidence in the system, which is so important in banks. Like if you believe there's going to be a run on the bank, you pull all your money out and the bank goes bankrupt, even if there's no underlying problem. Now, the difference here is that, again, there was a lot of problems with the banks in 08, but there was so many other divisions that they had that were profitable that even once you start to deal with this shit that they had, they still were able to recover and, operate as banks and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And no, the other point I'd make about TARP too is a lot of people have that number like $700 billion in their mind. I think only 60% of that was actually used. So like of the total money earmarked for TARP, basically 50% of it like didn't even get touched. I think it looms larger in people's minds because it also gets conflated with quantitative easing and all of the other things that the government did to bail out the system as a whole and to bail out like homeowners and things like that. So I think that there's much more to it than just the money that was given to the banks. But because then the banks turned such a huge profit when the wheels of quantitative easing went into motion, and that money is completely separate from TARP, that I think people conflate the two and say, hey, look, all of a sudden, right? Because when you cut rates to zero and you do these massive treasury purchase programs and all these things, it's a great way for banks to make money. And so all of a sudden the American taxpayer was like, wait a minute, they went from in the toilet to now massive profits in 2009, 2010. How did that happen to them? It's all the bailout money at work. And it's like, well, again, we're conflating the terms bailout, word TARP, and QE. Those who don't understand money are doomed not to have any. If you understand how all these things work together, there were ways to make money in this set of circumstances. And unfortunately, people who didn't understand what was going on got the shit end of the stick.
But again, with TARP, there was a number of different parts to it. It was like the asset guarantee program, capital purchase program, and then part of it was the targeted investment program where it's like they gave money to the bank. But at Morgan Stanley at the time, I remember, they didn't want the money. They were forced to take it. And the reason they didn't want it, and I think this is really important, they had negotiated with Mitsubishi. You had Goldman Sachs who had negotiated with Warren Buffett. They both had the injections of capital that they needed at that time. But this was about the entire confidence of the banking sector writ large. And it wasn't just about Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, who, by the way, had figured their shit out post Lehman going down.
Well, they did have an injection of capital. I mean, they talk about the injection of capital to buy stay of execution here. I don't think we can say definitively that without TARP having taken place and a restoration of faith in the entire banking sector, that would have been sufficient.
Yes, I agree, because back to your point, it's a confidence game. So yes, I agree with that. I mean, that was the same thing with First Republic and Silicon Valley Bank. Literally, there was a run on the bank because you had these VC guys who were telling all of their people to pull their money out. And then all of a sudden, SVB is like, holy shit. I mean, there were some bad investments. The irony is with Silicon Valley Bank, they were investing in US Treasuries. It was just like, because of the rate hiking cycle, the value started to go down. But anyway, the point is that confidence is so important in the banking sector that this was the whole rationale for the TARP program, for these capital injections, which to your point, Lehman going down basically was like dominoes. Everything else started to go down too, because it was like when one thing falls and you have all these bilateral agreements, it becomes this massive shit show. And so the confidence was critical in here.
And the other thing I want to talk about is they introduced the concept of moral hazard here. The big thing that everyone was grappling with on a more like philosophical level at the time was, you got to teach your kid a lesson, right? If your kid punches his brother in the face, like you got to let him know, hey, no TV, no Nintendo tomorrow, like no Nintendo for a year. Okay, buddy, you need to show people that there are consequences to bad actions, or else you create this moral hazard that if everyone knows, okay, I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist or somebody's going to bail me out, you create this moral hazard that this bad behavior will continue. And so there was this fear that if everyone emerged from the global financial crisis unscathed, that there would then be this introduction of this concept of moral hazard. And people felt that TARP and all these things created that moral hazard, and that the thing that everyone holds up was Lehman being allowed to go under. It's like, no, this can happen. They'll let you go under. We've crossed that Rubicon. That moral hazard has already been addressed and issued. I think the bigger issue is that life finds a way, and it just pushed all of that risk-taking activity into other areas of the markets and away from banks.
Yeah. Okay. So Tom sits down and says, so much for too big to fail. Philip says, by the way, Philip was the one who was against and like making fun of the ESG stuff in like very early episodes, by the way.
Oh, you're right.
Do you remember? Yeah.
Good call. Oh, Philip is such a badass.
Yeah. So he says, hear me out. Credit Suisse was the last bank to go through this kind of thing. And the Gulf clearly had a huge appetite for a legacy banking name. So again, in late 2022, Credit Suisse had raised funding from a group of major investors, which included the Saudis, Qatar Investment Authority. And it's by the way, it's a lot of these same players who are getting involved in the possible acquisition of Paramount, which I've, been.
And a lot of the same players that I have familiarity from 2008. So we'll talk about that as well. But
interesting. Got it.
They injected something like $4 billion worth of capital to buy a combined 15% stake in Credit Suisse in 2022.
Credit Suisse, by the way, and I think this is what they're referring to with why people are against the possible Mitsubishi deal that we're going to talk about, is that ultimately it did go kaput and was sold to UBS. And it's so funny. The very first training program I ever did was at Credit Suisse. And I have such amazing memories of Credit Suisse. I literally think I was teaching there when I met my husband. So I love that Madison Square Park location. And then, it's now a UBS on Madison because it got
taken over for you. We always stay at the Edition Hotel right across from the offices. because I mentioned 11 Madison Park on the last episode, and you're like, oh my God.
And I lived.
Did you regularly go there for dinner? It's like $1,000 a head.
But I also, no, because I lived on 25th between Park and Madison for a long time. So I lived like a block away on top of that. So I always loved to go teach there too, because I'd be like, roll out of bed and like walk across the street, which is great. But anyway, sorry. So
just
continue.
to give you guys the history of the Credit Suisse deal, basically by early 2023, the Saudis had to publicly rule out any further support due to regulatory ownership limits. And what that did is it triggered a massive crisis of confidence. And just to be clear, Credit Suisse had like years of mismanagement. They had so many scandals. Everyone has these things, you know what I'm saying? But here's what happens too. We talked about this theme of confidence keeps coming back. And so when the regional banking crisis of 2023 happened that you were talking about, Credit Suisse, which was also a depository institution, right? They had a massive outflow of deposits and a liquidity crisis that then effectively threatened their financial stability. And so what happened is that Swiss authorities jumped in and brokered this emergency weekend deal in March of 2023 when SVB was going under, First Republic, all those guys. And they had UBS acquire Credit Suisse at a massively discounted price. But what also happened during that was of note was, I think we touched on this maybe last episode or the episode before, these basically like the way that the European banks funded their tier one capital. They had these AT1, so additional tier one capital bonds, and they made bondholders take the losses on those while preserving some equity value. So that shocked everyone because it was like, wait, the rules of the game don't apply? So the Credit Suisse was almost more shocking than SVB, but kind of flew under the radar because of the whole SVB thing happening concurrently.
Well, and I will add, and this is why, like I said, later we are going to get into a little converts lesson, because the way that they were able to raise a lot of the tier one capital was through the converts. And so it was like a mandatory convert. There was the convertible preferred. Anyway, and Adler then says in reference to Credit Suisse, he said, look how that ended, being subsumed by their biggest rival. And so he says, I'm sorry, but I think I speak for the 45,000 employees when I speak in opposition to Pierpoint's name being used to reputation. And then he can't think of the next word. And so he's like trying to come up with it. And Eric jumps in and says launder, like reputation launder, that's state-backed money, right, Eric? And Eric says their values are an anathema to everything we hold dear. And Wilhelmina says quibbling over the cultural province of the capital that could save us feels indulgent. Could be time for some real politique. And Adler replies, this coming from Madam ESG, I guess morals really do become more flexible in an emergency. And Wilhelmina says, or maybe the answer is closer to home. Tom says, let's take a minute. And Adler says to Eric, can I steal you? And so they all kind of break and like go into their little side hustles. And Adler is pissed. He says, don't finish my effing sentences. It's a royal court in there. Don't you understand? And Eric says, I thought that tonight was more important than jockeying for favorite positions. I thought you cared about the soul of the firm. Adler says, we do. But the more senior I become, the more influence we have. Listen, Wilhelmina, she's not the head of banking, asset management, corporate credit, but her ideology gave her a crusader's zeal. She wanted to be proven right and be first on ESG. That's why she pushed this shit so hard. That's why we overstretched. She should be strung up for it. This is all going to end in a purge, which for us means a putz, which is just a coup. How does Eric Tao, global head of institutional security, sound to you? And Eric replies, I will follow in your slipstream. But they're there. They're all like hush, hush. And these, they stop talking when someone walks by. And Eric says, I wonder what they're talking about, like talking with the people in the room. And Adler replies, whatever outcome suits. It's key that we lay as much shit as we can at her feet. She can be ESG's headstone, bury her beneath it. So they're all kind of trying to, or I guess maybe it's more him, trying to figure out who are we going to lay the blame at. And to be honest, I am with him that like it was her fault. And she was the one who, so like why? So like, why isn't she being hung out to dry for this?
Because she's a better political operative. She is politically outmaneuvering both of them. And you can see
that's true.
Having this thought. When Eric says, and follow in your slipstream, he's not looking at Adler. He's kind of looking off into the distance and gaming out what it would look like if he were to try to ride Adler's coattails up. Now, head of institutional securities is a big freaking title. But by the way, what was Eric's title?
I was going to
like, isn't he?
I thought that's what he was.
I think he's global head of sales. So global head of institutional securities is going to give him purview over the trading desk as well. But again, he acts like Rishi reports into him and Rishi's a trader. So again, it's a big title. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But like, I didn't see it as like that different. It was just like, and you'll get trading too, Like,
I mean,
and I think he's starting to game out, okay, when Adler calls it a royal court, right? You think about Game of Thrones, you think about any depiction of like a royal court. You've got the jesters, right? So the useful idiots, if you will. And you've got all the different courtiers trying to like curry favor with the king and stuff like that. And so we're now starting to see these factions emerge within this war room. That's just how I was just like in the war room. That's how I referred to it in my notes.
But I
think that Eric listening to Adler and seeing him having stumbled over that word, and then how badly he reacted to Eric bailing him out. Eric was like, dude, I'm giving you a hand, right? Like when one of us is fumphing around for a word, the other one's like, if you're trying to say this and then re-say the line, we'll be fine, you know? Flash and editing. Eric's trying to make Adler look good because he thinks that he's aligned, that they're aligned together.
Okay, so Adler then looks down at his phone and he gets an email and it says, Pierpoint Mitsubishi Venture. He says, oh, fucking K. Mitsubishi is live. I've been close to them since my sit in Tokyo in the aughts. And by the way, the aughts, it was a term that I hadn't heard of, despite the fact that I worked on this. No. It was a couple of years ago was the first time I'd heard of it. And it was because you were using the term. But it was literally, no. This was like 2 years ago. I had never heard it called the aughts. The aughts are just like 08, 07, like the whatever, like the zeros, the not teens, the not 20s. Yeah. So Tokyo in the aughts, I've been priming them for a capital injection for the last few weeks. Eric rubs his head and he's like, why not? Sure. Adler says, it'll allow us to fight another day, keep Pierpoint's autonomy. When I'm CFO, I will effing drag you up with me. I'll place you anywhere in the world. And Eric says, how do you still have the energy for this? So he's starting to question what's going on with Adler. And Adler says, what else is there? The action is the juice. And he walks off.
I do think when Eric is hearing this, kind of his physical reaction, he's like, you know, like he's kind of literally and metaphorically scratching his head. And he's like, Mitsubishi. But I think, again, he's also hearing about Adler's machinations and thinking, okay, so if this goes through, it's going to be because of everything Adler has done. Adler is going to be the one in power. Do I want Adler in power? And we've got this buddy-buddy intro to this episode of Adler and Eric side by side. And we had that emotional moment in Adler's hotel room when he confessed about his terminal cancer. But I want to remind our dear listeners at this point that they do not have a past that is not fraught with peril. So let's recall that it was Adler who sidelined Eric and sent him to senior relationship management under the guise of spending more time with his family. Well, how'd that work out, right? Eric's family fell apart as a result. So I just want to remind you guys that it's not out of nowhere that Eric is not necessarily thrilled about the idea of Adler ascending the throne. They have actually a very complicated relationship. And there have been backstabbings before. If you'll recall at the end of season 2, which we'll talk about later, Adler gets basically ambushed and blackmailed by Eric and Harper because of their attempts to make it work and stay at the firm and all that stuff. So they are building here through these scenes where Adler and Eric are hashing it out. Adler's got this grand plan and you're my loyal lieutenant and we're going to go and it's us to the top and like you and me against the world, baby. And increasingly with each scene, you see Eric start to look more confused, more hesitant, even though the words he's saying sound like he's in agreement with Adler's plan.
Yep. So next scene, we're with Robert and Yaz. They're driving down the highway and he's explaining about like these mushrooms that he's psilocybin. Yeah. Yaz is like, you're talking about magic mushrooms because he's like, they're fundamentally non-toxic. So you could get it to be integrated into your daily life, like your morning coffee. And Robert says, the active ingredient is psilocybin. He says, but it's in pharmaceutical form. And so Little Labs is the name of the company he is potentially teaming up with. And Yaz says, so surely the whole point is to get as mashed out of your head as possible. To her, she's always like, max out on the drugs. And Robert's like, no, it's about a dose and a mindset setting. And he goes on, he's like talking very like, he clearly believes in the product. And Yaz goes, you have no idea how annoying it is to listen to someone proselytizing about the benefits of a hallucinogen. It's like you joined a cult, which also is kind of interesting because he went on like, I don't know if it was a psilocybin retreat that like he got dragged on. Retreat. It was ayahuasca, but I feel like they're all in the same camp of like mind altering.
All part of that same podcast bro culture. Like I have been influenced to at one point want to go on an ayahuasca retreat after like listening to enough podcasts about seeing the face of God and the moon or whatever. And I was like, maybe I should do that and like learn more about my life. It just doesn't like we're so risk averse.
No, well, I think that it's like the medical, like for someone who is dying of terminal cancer, like it helps people face their fear of death or whatever it is and can be just life-changing. And then also on the Sam Harris side, who was very pro doing it once and it just changes your mind. Like,
maybe we should do it. Maybe
I know.
we're going on an ayahuasca retreat.
I don't know if it's ayahuasca. I forget which one it is. Yeah. But anyway, Robert says, finally, you're a little more animated. It only took you putting someone down, but whatever. But he does tell her.
Robert, I love Robert. Robert is doing everything he can to try to get Yasmin back to being like happy and herself. Yeah. But like herself isn't necessarily great for Robert. Like,
no,
he is doing this totally selflessly, being like, hey, this woman like tortured and abused me. This woman perpetually takes advantage of me, but I still love her so much that I am willing to like do everything I can and be like a dancing circus monkey here just to make her happy.
Yep. So as they're driving, she gets a call from Maxim, and Robert says he has to pull over to use the bathroom anyway. So he's like, whatever. So Yas picks up, and Maxim apologizes for falling out of her life, says that he saw the photos of Charles, her dad, and says that Yas needs to know that the company was complicit in all of the stuff that her dad did. Yasmin asks how, and Maxim says that he has some pretty heinous anti-woke pals at Hanani who are on the board with him, and they hate this new hypocrisy. They say the NDAs your father had don't just cover his personal life. He says some of Charlie's women only started working for Hanani after they had signed. Hanani gave them jobs, bogus accounting lines on the payroll, and Rose and the company bought their silence for years just as much as he did. Yaz tells him that they're trying to make her the face of the whole thing, and Maxim says, yeah, because it's an open secret at Hanani, and maybe it's a matter of time before someone leaks it. You're perfectly positioned to be tarred if it ever comes to light. You're prepackaged to take the blame as you're already the headline. And Yaz is just like, that sneaky little C word. Maxim says that someone slipped him a screenshot of the payrolls and that the women with the NDAs all have checks next to their name. So Yaz asks if he can send it to her, and Maxim agrees, but says it's illegal and her lawyer probably won't let her use it. She says, I just don't think they should be compounding your guilt. Sorry, grief. I don't want to tell you how to feel about him, which is an interesting slip of words because she did feel guilty about killing him, possibly, but not about the women. Like, she didn't know about the women, but she knew about, like, she didn't exactly save him. So Maxim says, I think Charlie found it difficult to see people as people. Yas just replies, yeah, you don't effing say. And she hangs up with tears in her eyes.
You see Maxim also being like, cool, I was like helping you out. Like, you know, you take care, basically like father, like daughter. He's doing this thing to help her out. And he's on
illegal
this, like, wilderness retreat in Big Basin. So continuing this like bro-y thing, he's on some path of self-discovery, dealing with his demons, I guess. And he does this thing, almost like a 12-step program. Like, hey, I'm making amends with Yasmin by doing this thing that's like super morally shady, but benefits her. And instead,
because I think he loved her. I think he actually did love her.
He cares about her a lot.
Or yeah.
And I think that he was complicit in all of this, much more so than she was. He knew about it all along. So I think he's trying to absolve himself by helping her out. And he's trying to explain to her, like, hey, listen, your dad was this bad guy, but like, let's try to understand his psychology, you know? And she just hangs up on him as like, thanks for all your help. Have a nice life. And he's like, okay, dude. Yeah. Like, guess you're not so much from your dad after all. Sympathetic with Yasmin almost the entire show. This is the episode where I think they may have Yasmin make a turn, and we'll get to some of like the signs that she starts to show, which don't mean much in this episode, but yeah. So after she hangs up with Maxim, she reaches for the samples of this psilocybin drug. So immediately she's got like her coping mechanism, because we know she always has these like coping mechanisms, which tend to be like alcohol, her red wine, drugs, whatever she can get her hands on, and or sex. And no one else is in the car, but there's drugs. So she's and then like fiddles with it, and Robert gets back in the car.
Well, she's like, so this is the product you're selling, right? And then he goes, this probably isn't the place to take it properly. Like, you need to be in the right mind space. But anyway, wants to try them in. Again, I wrote like the most self-destructive way. And Robert then changes the topic and says, you hungry? And she says, yeah, I'm fucking starving.
Which is such a father, like, hey, like, how about instead of destroying yourself, we feed you? Right? Like, you seem hangry. Like, I bet some food would fix this situation. Like, again, a friendly, caring thing to do.
Yep. So next thing, they were checking into a hotel, and a woman says the rooms are next to each other, 6 and 7. And I was like, 6, 7. Like, Jen and I both have kids. I don't know if your 7-year-old is as into the 6, 7. He's a boy. So maybe, is it still?
He was very into it. It's like, I'm glad to see it's an equal opportunity thing among boys and girls. He was very, very into it. It's actually helped with our math a lot, because like every single teacher would take advantage of it and make the answer to every question 67 or whatever it was, like, or 66, and try to get them to, like, if you add 1. I mean, I think the teachers have been milking it for all it's worth to try to keep their sanity.
Yeah, it's funny. If you're wondering what we're talking about, it's some weird craze that kids are like obsessed with 6 and 7 and nobody has any idea why. Nobody knows what it means. It doesn't mean anything, but it's hilarious.
And no one will remember this by the time.
They're like, why are you talking about 6 and 7?
Episode.
So the woman checking them in seems to be maybe making eyes at Robert, but so she warns Yaz that the kettle in her room is a little bit iffy. And Yaz asks if she could get one that works. The woman says, sorry. And Yaz is like, it's a basic amenity. I mean, to me, if my kettle in my room didn't work, I'd be like, okay, like, I don't know. I'm not going to use the kettle anyway, but I don't know. Maybe
Yaz is being a straight up bitch. This woman behind the desk has a giant grin on. She's so excited. She's clearly like moony eyed at Robert or whatever. And Yasmin's giving her so much attitude. Dude, this is some crappy inn on the way from London to Wales or whatever. This is like some roadside thing. The fact that there's not a working thing for you to make tea, cry me a freaking river. And like, Robert's like, you can borrow mine. Like, calm down. Why are you
Well, it's my
this woman?
My first time I watched it, I just had assumed it was the shower. And then the second, like I thought it was like an actual basic amenity. And then I watched it the second time and I was like, the tea kettle? Like, the tea kettle. What? Yeah, like it's the stupidest thing.
It's the UK, so it's probably a more standard thing. But for us, it's like being like the Keurig machine in or the Nespresso doesn't work. I'm like, they never work. I never know how to use them anyways.
Don't use it. No. Robert says that she can use his. And so as he walks off, the woman asks if they work together. And Yaz says, no, we're a couple. And the woman says, oh, well, I thought with the separate rooms. She goes, we're very religious. Do you have a lighter? Which is like, I don't know. If you're religious, I don't exactly expect most people to be like lighting up. But, and so the woman says yes. And then the next scene, we hear Denise talking. And she says, I got your email. What do you expect me to do with this? Yaz replies, I mean, it's leverage. No, it's evidence of their complicity. This is on Rose's head. And Denise replies, have you thought about what making this public would do to the victims? I mean, these women like you have been through a lot. Leaking this to the public would re-traumatize them. And so she wants to, instead of like using it in court, literally leak it so that it basically goes out to everyone via the press.
Yeah.
And Yaz says
in the court of public opinion rather than some proper legal procedure.
Exactly. So instead of keeping their names private, it would be like in the Epstein case where it's like, instead of keeping.
Immediately what I thought of. They were like, we can't share these files because it'll re-traumatize these women.
Right. But again, it would be like, but if it went through the court proceedings, they could keep it quiet. This is literally their names with the fact that they signed NDAs and stuff. And so Yaz says, I didn't think about that. Denise says a publicity battle is going to be hard, but we can win it. They go low, we go high, right? Speak later. And Yaz looks like F this. And she just takes a puff of a cigarette. So,
she's been, so here's the thing, right? Yasmin has been offered this get out of jail free card, but it's not free. It comes at the cost of perpetuating the cycle of sexual violence and abuse of women and exploitation who were victims of her father. So the question is, right, is Yasmin willing to stand up and take the fall for everything he did wrong in order to spare other women from the same fate that she has suffered, meaning having their lives ruined by her father and ruined by the Hanani family? Or is she willing to basically strike a deal with the devil and throw these women under the bus in her attempt to clear her name and save herself, knowing full well these women are going to be collateral damage?
Yeah.
So I think Yaz has a big moral conundrum that she's struggling with here. And I think the Yasmin that we have seen goes from someone who I think like was the person who would do the right thing maybe in the past to I think she's been on this descent where now I think maybe season 1 Yasmin would have been like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to.
But we've always seen the hints with how she treated Venetia.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that she realized she was wrong with Venetia though, right? Like I think she was like, I had to do this and now you have to go through this was her immediate reaction because by the way, I think it's a very natural reaction to have when you've been through some kind of hazing that everybody else has to go through it. But I think given that she's been the butt of everyone else's joke, whether it's her dad's, whether it's Harper's, whether it's Eric's. And I think we've seen her descent this season into the person who I was like, she's definitely going to make the wrong decision. Like, and again, wrong decision.
Yeah. I mean, there should have been.
A lot of people in her situation wouldn't do the same. Knock on wood, never have to face these choices myself.
Right. I will say to your point, like to have her take the blame for everything when she didn't know anything, that doesn't feel right. And then
it doesn't feel right either.
Yeah. So they're neither are good. They're two bad choices. So next scene, we're back at Pierpoint and Adler is saying, Tom, I've engaged Mitsubishi in substantive talks. And as he's saying this, Wilhelmina says, Michael Stone from Barclays is on his way into the building. And by the way, Jen, I know, like, because by the way, Jen worked at Lehman and then Barclays after Barclays bought Lehman. So this is like full, like,
spoiler alert. Yeah.
So
Let's get to the full timeline for historical accuracy of the Lehman bankruptcy, which I think will help frame the entire rest of this episode if you're thinking about what actually happened versus what they're portraying here. So in March of 2008, Bear Stearns goes under. Immediately, all eyes are on Lehman because Lehman looks most like Bear Stearns.
Hold on. I want to back up just a tiny bit because there was actually in 2007, we knew things were getting bad. There was actually some huge trade where Morgan Stanley lost. And I forget the exact amount. It might've been like 9 billion or so. Yeah. And like, actually, I remember I was on the Morgan Stanley trading floor and Jen sitting over at Lehman calls me. She's like, are you guys okay over there? Like there was actually concern about Morgan Stanley. I mean, again, all of the banks were like, oh shit, like there's bad stuff everywhere.
Brought up on our DMs the other day. I was like, I haven't heard that name in a month of Sundays. Like there were so many canaries in the coal mine, if you will. You guys had a rogue trade. Like everyone had a rogue trade.
Well, yes. There was the rogue trader. And then there was also like the book of all the shit that they had too. But yes.
Yeah. There was the systemic risk at the banks though, which was the big thing. So like a Jerome Kerviel or whatever, like thanks very much for the 2 weekers. But it's like all of these things were not necessarily indicative to the average person that there was so much systemic risk that we were on the brink until I think Bear went under. Yeah. And I think to see, and Bear Stearns, by the way, was the firm I got my first job offer at. I love Bear, by the way. If I hadn't gone to Lehman, I probably would have chosen Bear. I loved that place. So like, I have the worst taste in banks.
At least you have a good taste in men.
Don't follow me. Yeah, hopefully. But so, okay, guess who Lehman's first call in March of 2008 was for help when Bear Stearns went under?
Assuming Lehman?
Anyone? Warren Buffett. And they said, hey, Warren, you want to invest in us? Like, things don't feel great right now. Look, JP Morgan, with the help of the government, just bought Bear Stearns. Maybe you want to make a big investment in Lehman Brothers. Warren's like, thanks, but no thanks. And so instead, to raise capital in April of 2008, Lehman Brothers does, Kristen, your favorite, a $4 billion convertible stock issuance. Okay, so that gives them some more capital to buy.
I need to know, was it mandatory convert? Was it convert preferred?
I do not remember. You will have to find out. But this is neither here nor there because things do not end well at the end of this story. So then by May, that $4 billion literally bought them a month. By May, Lehman started a series of talks with a consortium of Korean banks led by KDB. So KDB, the Korean Development Bank, is actually owned by the Korean government. But like, it's not like anything happens. They just start these talks. By June of 2008, we had our quarterly earnings call where we announced a loss of $2.8 billion for the second quarter. And so to shore up that loss, we raised $6 billion in preferred and common stock. So for anyone who's keeping track, we've raised $4 billion back in April and now another $6 billion in June. So $10 billion worth of new capital. In July, unbeknownst to all of us, my then boyfriend at the time starts getting calls on like all these mysterious projects that he can't talk to me about. They started behind the scenes working on a plan to do effectively a good bank, bad bank split, where they were going to put all the toxic assets that Lehman owned into this random holding corporation or whatever, and then have like clean Lehman over here. But they start the talks on like how that would happen. By the way, KDB, who's in talks with them at the time, they're like, cool, we want nothing to do with something called bad bank. We only want good bank, right? We don't want any of that nonsense. So just so you know. And at the same time, we asked BOA to make an investment in us that would have given them a 30% stake. That's a huge ownership stake relative to the type of ownership stakes that most people are talking about. They were like, no, but like thought about it. So then in August, we asked BOA to buy the whole damn firm. We were like, just take the whole thing. Like, who cares about 30%? Buy all of Lehman. And they were like, no. So there were other potential acquirers. I think MetLife, the Investment Corporation of Dubai, they both considered buying Neuberger Berman, which haven't heard that name in a long time, right? That was our wealth and asset management business. But I've
done trainings for them since,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you've heard of them more than like I've thought about them. I have not thought about them since
I've done training since.
And by the end of August anyway, they were like, no, like none of this, we're out. Okay. So then we get to September. Now, for those of you who know anything about what it's like to be, at the time, I was a newly promoted investment banking associate. You do not get to take a lot of vacation when you're a junior person. So I had a vacation planned basically like right after my promotion to associate with, again, my then boyfriend at the time, to go to Greece. So we were going to go to Athens and then do a couple of the Greek islands. So we leave for that vacation the first week in September. While we're gone, on September 7th, Fannie and Freddie are placed into conservatorship. So the two GSEs at the heart of the mortgage meltdown that's happening in the US. That's not great. On September 8th, 2008, the Treasury Secretary calls Bank of America and says, okay, guys, like, I know that they've asked you a whole bunch, but can you pretty please buy Lehman Brothers? Like, it would just be so great. And Bank of America's like, well, are you going to help us do it? Like, you guys helped JP Morgan buy Bear Stearns? And the government's like, oh, no. No, we're not going to help you. No, you just need to do it.
Yeah.
On September 10th, we have our last earnings call ever. So at the time, said then boyfriend and I are on a ferry from Mykonos to Santorini on his BlackBerry that gets like no service, listening to this conference call where they announced the grand plan to split us into a good bank, bad bank. And after this call, which I can hear like bank, you know, like you can barely hear anything. I looked at this guy and I was like, and he was like, so this is what we've been working on. What do you think? And I was like, when we get back to America, we are not going to have jobs. So let's go get really drunk tonight. So, yeah, I mean, it went over like a lead balloon. All of Lehman's counterparties, all of their clearing banks were like, no freaking way. This is a terrible plan. We need way more collateral to back up any agreements that you have for any repo, like for any overnight funding, any liquidity. You need so much more cash. And so it wasn't like there was a run on the bank because we weren't, really a depository institution, but it was a run on our liquidity. Everyone was like, you need so much more cash for any position you have on. So they basically just wanted a ton more capital to keep the doors open, which we didn't have. Okay. So this brings us to Thursday, September 11th, 2008. I was on a plane back from Greece at this point. So,
I would not want to be traveling on September 11th on a plane. I mean, I'm shocking that you did that.
Yeah, it was again, like at a certain point when you're a first year associate, like whatever the cheapest flight you can get is the one you take. So at this point, Barclays, a British bank whose CEO at the time was a man called Bob Diamond, they came sniffing around. So that's where we are in history right now. We are basically on September 11th, 2008. Okay. So they started looking really hard at buying Lehman. And so just to think about what it would take for Barclays, then a UK bank, to buy Lehman Brothers and why they would want them, by the way. So Barclays at the time looked a lot like the Pierpoint we see in season 1, where they were a powerhouse in fixed income sales and trading. They were the British bank that had like a great rates business, a great FX business, like whatever. That was Barclays Capital, Barcap. They didn't have much of an investment bank when it came to like underwriting IPOs, doing mergers and acquisitions. Lehman had all that. So they were eyeing Lehman for all of that, for like an increased presence in the US, because they were like the big kind of category killer, also like depository institution in the UK. And also Lehman had formerly Morgan Stanley's Midtown office building. Yeah. They had this primo real estate, this 745 7th Avenue building. And it was originally supposed to be Morgan Stanley's new headquarters. And Lehman got it from Morgan Stanley after our headquarters in the financial district was wiped out on September 11th, 2001. By the way,
9/11.
Just not a good time for anything to happen that first and second week in September in New York City. When I think it was the helicopter pad from the World Trade Center took out Lehman's headquarters when it collapsed. So I was employed by Morgan Stanley before I was ever employed by Lehman. Morgan gave Lehman its brand new headquarters. And that's why we were in that shitty 1585 Broadway building forever.
1585 is terrible.
They did renovate it multiple times after you left, but it was still.
Oh, no. I've been there a lot because I trained there so much.
So this is where we are. So now Barclays is like, okay, what you got?
But I love how it's like Bob Diamond and they make him Mike Stone. It's like they can't even give him a better stone. They give him just stone, not like, it's like you go from diamond to like maybe emeralds, but whatever. All right. So he says, Michael and I have our personal relationship, horse driven mostly, which by the way makes it sound a little bit like they're like horse gambling together, which is back to the.
I was like, is it like they're proper equestrians or they are
maybe
like horse gamblers like Rishi? I don't know. They didn't say.
Yeah. So he says, off the record, they've always been interested in our business. And so Tom says, what's the play? Sell a division? Philip says they did that with Lehman, core North America operations. Wilhelmina says, given our share price is now closed at $35, we are by all accounts a distressed asset, which like, They've halved, but I don't know why that would mean they were necessarily distressed.
I'm assuming their bank debt has traded down. Nobody will let them refinance their debt. So I think that they're saying we have defaulted on a coupon payment.
Oh, so they're separate. Because the share price trading down doesn't necessarily mean they're a distressed asset. But
agreed. I presume that these were like two,
especially because Adler's like, we're going to be trading in the cents, and it's like we went from 45 to 35. We went from like, I mean, that's fine. If you went from, and I think they were in the 90 to 35, like that's not great, but you're not distressed just because your share price is traded down to, in this case, like a 35. Like what? So
I do think that they've kind of like consolidated here for purposes of the average viewer who is not really like, where's the biggest stress coming from? But to your point, when Lehman Brothers stock had halved, we were all like, we're going to be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, same with Morgan Stanley.
Like, you young people should really add here. Like if you can buy some stock, like you should, this is the buying opportunity of a lifetime.
We obviously have done these types of deep dives into Succession, and then I use it as like the base story for my course. And I'm like trying to recreate the share price and like all the different stuff. And it's like, it's not supposed to all tie out. And I'm like, no, but it needs to. Anyway.
It needs to. Yeah. But so I mean, again, the whole point that they can't refinance their debt.
Yeah, that's a default. That's case default. Yeah, they're there. So she says they might as well be buying us wholesale. So Adler says we need a strategic investment, not a sale. In our 150th year, we cannot become a subsidiary to an effing British high street bank. Tom says, I appreciate how romantic you are about this, but we need to be practical. Barclays buying Pierpoint is our best option. Again, I am still, it's so funny because back to like the whole thing we were talking about before, being someone who like was at Morgan Stanley where they kept getting those capital injections and it did stave off anything bad. I am, especially because like there wasn't everything else going on around it. I am in agreement with Adler, but again, Morgan Stanley still had like actual freaking money coming in from like other things, not just their like no IPO fees. Now they have no money, you know?
Right. So. But I think that they are also representative of the Dick Foles voice in the room who turned down so many opportunities for salvation.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
He pissed everybody off. Like, I haven't been able to watch it yet, but I know that that's what they depict so often in the movies and fictionalized versions of these stories. It's basically like Dick Foles was such an asshole.
Jen has not been able to she does not have the stomach to watch Too Big to Fail or any of those. We need to at some point.
I will review it. I promise. I'm ready. But so I think that's who that's supposed to represent.
Got it. Outside, Rishi sees that guy Mike Stone walking into the building. So he calls Harper. He says, you might have you just at your take profit level. The Barclays CEO just arrived and he looks like he means business. And Pierpoint stock will rip on any merger or takeover chatter. That's Nagasaki for your short, right? Because if people believe that the company is going to be bought, usually what happens is if there is an offer price, the share price starts to trade up to where you expect the deal to go through at. And so people no longer are trading it based on like potential downfall. It's basically trading on what is the chance you believe that this deal will go through. So it becomes like a merger arb play. And so it's a totally different thing. So if they're short, like they should take the money now. Barclays, by the way, because they will buy at a premium to where the stock currently is trading. So she looks at her screen and it's up to 323 million. Harper then runs to get her jackets and says, it's definitely him. And Rishi replies, yeah. And he looks horny for assets. Harper says, hey, you know, I can't hire 3 people, Rishi. What do you want to do? Meaning he delivered, but she cannot take him, Anraj and Sweet Pea. And he says, babe, come on. It's only ever been me. I thought it was interesting that she looked like she was disappointed to hear him say that. Like she like hopes better from him.
She did. And remember, Rishi has stabbed her before, but they've gone kind of blow for blow, if you will. But I think she was kind of giving Rishi like one last shot at redemption before she completely makes up her mind about him. And I think we see that so often with these characters where there's like that switching point where suddenly someone makes the decision about someone and their gloves are off after that. Because remember, she was like, oh, I forgot you're a dad now when Rishi talked about bringing Anraj and Sweet Pea with him. I think that was a very humanizing moment for Rishi, who's made a ton of bad decisions. The fact that he wanted to bring Anraj with him, whom he has treated like absolute garbage and who, as by all accounts, like doesn't seem to add much value to Rishi's life, but he actually cares about him. And same with Sweet Pea, by the way, our OnlyFans model, who has been right about everything, but no one has listened to her. And Rishi was so dismissive of all of her work that she was trying to show. He was like, remember, I'll give you 10 out of 10. I don't care because we're sleeping together or whatever. I actually think he was trying to do right. This was like Rishi's last chance at redemption. And I actually think that's a very important moment where he looks disappointed and then he comes back with his bravado of like, oh, babe, you know, it's only ever been me, right? Like, and she's like, oh, I was kind of hoping you'd say like, you got to bring them too. And I actually think that
she might have. Yeah.
Like, she doesn't care, right? Like they can hire whoever they want, fire them the next week or whatever it is, right? But like, I think she wanted better from him. And he just reverted back to, okay, it's only ever been me. I only actually care about me.
Yep. So she says, okay, come in after this all shakes out and we'll talk. All right. So next scene, we're back up on the floor, right? In the war room. And Adler says, how would the floor take a effing sale to Barclays? To which Eric says, maybe they just want somewhere to work, which is probably true. Adler says, you don't have 20 years of options. I've never sold a damn share. A Brit takeover would decimate it all. And you had talked about how like this is definitely typical of what happened in Lehman in the sense that people like didn't sell, but also, I mean, his true motives come out. This is not about the whole, like the people and blah, blah, blah. It's about his stock options. And so Philip says, you could keep your deferred. And Adler replies, chump change. Wilhelmina says, we see your true motivation. So I think that was
Adler has just written his own death certificate, if you will, by admitting this. Like, oh, I'm so worried about my stock options. Now, I presume that the standard is with a stock option that if you have the right to buy a stock that no longer exists or has a change of control, all of a sudden that renders your stock option null and void.
No. So I think it's important just to understand like what those stock options are. And I teach this actually when I do any of our valuation stuff. There's different categories in the sense that you have all options that are outstanding and then exercisable, in the money and out of the money. So option is the right to buy shares of the company's stock for some price over some time periods. You are Joe Schmo or Kristen working at Morgan Stanley, and I'm given a stock option. If I leave the next day, I don't get to exercise that option. Right. I have to wait some time period. That's called vesting. So there's the difference between all the options that are outstanding and then how many are actually exercisable. The options that have vested are exercisable. The thing though is that typically in a change of control, you tend to, at least especially from a modeling standpoint, assume that all the options that are outstanding, even if that time period hasn't been met, will become exercisable. Now, it really does depend on the specific situation because you can have a cash deal or a stock deal, meaning would they be paid in Mitsubishi shares? Are they getting
Barclays.
Oh, in this case, sorry, it was Barclays. But yeah, so are they getting acquired and getting stock in exchange for their Pierpoint stock? In which case, you may not actually have to exercise. It might just be that all of a sudden now, instead of being able to exercise into Pierpoint shares, you were able to exercise into Barclays shares. And there's like this exchange ratio that gets applied. And so it's sort of transferable. Now, if it's a cash deal, typically you would be able to exercise at whatever the strike price is. And then the question becomes, is your option in the money or out of the money? And so this is where, I mean, it's possible that he has all these stock options that were just struck at a strike price that was so high that the share price is trading below that. So yes, it would expire out of the money. But typically, I mean, he's been there for 25, 30 years, and usually company share prices do tend to go up. And by the way, a lot of those options that he had would have converted into equity because
it was vested 5 years ago, even if he didn't sell out of the stock. Right.
So he would have shares of Pierpoint. Then he might have some options that have strike prices that were done in, say, the last 5 years. But the odds, I mean, I would assume that some would be in the money, but again, like if it's a stock deal, then it should be convertible. So that's why this doesn't necessarily make sense in the sense that your options do not just become null and void. It just is a question of the structure of the deal. Are they going to be convertible into Barclays shares, which maybe he doesn't want, and he thinks that it's not as valuable of a stock, but it would not just render the options null and void. If anything, it might trigger the ability to exercise early, potentially.
Got it. I think Barclays stock is trading at the same place where I got struck in like 2000.
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, Adler now talking to Wilhelmina because he is so salty against her, which again, I actually think he should be. She was responsible for this bullshit. But he says, and what's your motivation? Brokering a deal that obliterates us as long as you're central enough to keep your seat at the table? You know what? I think I finally made up my mind about you. And they start going after each other when then the Barclays CEO walks in. Wilhelmina gets up and she greets him. And Adler looks at Eric, who just kind of looks confused. And we don't hear what they say yet. But next scene, we're back with Robert and Yaz, and he like brings her out a battered sausage, and they kind of just joke about it because he's being so cute. And
so
he says,
cute and like friendly and fatherly, and
just like loving. And he says, "How perfect is this?" And Yaz starts to make sexual jokes, and Robert is just like, "What are you doing? You don't have to make everything a game. Like basically, we're beyond that." And she says she's sorry. She sits down together, and this is actually very important. So Robert stands next to her, and she says, "I don't know. I'm good at making people feel like I love them. But I don't know that I ever have. Have you?" And he then jokes and talks about some girl at school that he was obsessed with. But like clearly he loves Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he says yes, looks at her, pauses, and then says, "Oh yeah, some girl that he allegedly loved." But That look and the yes in and of itself tells us everything we need to know.
Yep. And so she says, it's just my first instinct. Whenever I feel something like love or care, I just want to make it ugly, turn it into something else, sex, anything else. Robert says, I don't know what to say. All I know is that for the first time in a long time, I've got that feeling in my stomach. I couldn't work out what it was, but I know now that it's anticipation. It's excitement for the future. And then they kiss and it's cute. They like go back into their hotel, but they go into their separate rooms. And Robert walks into his room first trying to be like, this is not about sex. This is about the fact that like, I kissed you. Like, this is I care about you.
We're not making into something ugly.
Mm-hmm. And so I feel like it's this moment where Yaz can see what her life could be like if she chose this person.
The Prince and the Pauper, because she's looking at this new version of her life that she could have with like scrappy guy who's eating fried food on a pier. This is something she never would have deigned to do in her old life, who's going to be working at a startup as a hustler, trying to make things work with some psilocybin thing, talk about hope and a prayer, and living in these crappy hotels. And she's like, could I be happy? And Robert is so happy with this possible direction, both for his business life and for his potential romantic life with Yasmin, that I think he's like, if things keep going like this, I'm excited. I could actually finally for the first time see a future between the two of us.
Yep. Okay. So next scene, we are with Harper and Petra, and Harper is telling Petra that their short is about to turn. Petra asks, how do you know? And actually, before we get into this, I have to say, between this episode and the next episode, I almost feel like they messed up somehow in like talking about this short. I don't know if you got that same thing. I was so confused because like what they say there. Anyway, I want to go through some of the inconsistencies that like I was so confused by, because it's like, wait a second.
We texted about this, that I was like, wait, how did they not make a killing on this trade, basically?
Exactly. Yeah. So again, next scene, Harper's with Petra saying, our short is about to turn. Petra asks, how do you know? And Harper says, look, I think we're diametrically opposed when it comes to the relationship between information and how it is traded upon. I think everything and everyone is moving in a big sledge of gray. Petra says, don't over-intellectualize. What have you done? Harper says, I have it on good authority that the CEO of Barclays has gone into Pierpoint. We need to take profit before they buy it and the stock rallies. Petra says, no, I don't think we should do that. Harper asks why, and Petra says, think about the risk reward. I mean, what is the % chance that you ascribe to him being here? Harper's like, 100%? It's too big of a coincidence. Petra says they're throwing a party for financial luminaries. But even if it's true, the stock gets a bump in the headline. I mean, what about the due diligence, the regulator, the government? Balance that against what we stand to gain if we hold the line. If Pierpoint trades to zero, where's your stomach? Because they still have, if they're at 30,
No, and by the way, that's exactly what happened. So I talked about that moment on September 11th where Barclays started to very seriously look at buying Lehman. They got close, but the UK regulator wouldn't allow it. And also, if you think about this, the UK, by the way, was part of the EU at the time. Not exactly a governing body known for expediency, right? I mean, they have 400 pages on the law of like how to trade cabbages. So the idea that something could get pushed through, this is very much based in historically accurate things where like the Barclays' initial attempt to consider purchasing Lehman was shut down by the regulators over the weekend.
Yep. So Harper says, I don't know what it looks like to the regulator if we're always on the right side of this trade at always the right time, which by the way, she's trying to say be on the right side of it. So that's why I was like, wait a second, aren't you advocating to do that? So that was confusing.
Correct. So Petra's the one who should have said that line. It almost felt to me, you know how sometimes when we're going through the recaps and, we'll say a line and be like, oh, that was said by someone else and it changes the meaning. I almost felt like the writers meant to have Petra say, how is it going to look to the regulators if we're always on the right side of this trade at exactly the right time? Meaning if we now take profits, as Michael Stone is seen walking into their offices. But I will say this. Now, overhearing something in the bathroom, privileged information. Seeing someone walk in off the street, like that sounds like fair game to me.
Yeah, I agree. So Petra says, it's the same way that like if you're doing due diligence on something, you go and you see like, are there actual factories where they say there are factories? We won't get into Minnesota, like are there children in the daycares? But like, Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad if you feel we have to cut that because that's actually really funny.
It's up to you. I mean, again, that's become such a political hot potato. But so Petra says, moving forward with honesty, I know Pierpoint is terminally ill. And Petra asks how. And then she says, I overheard it in the toilet. Petra says, in Pierpoint? Jesus Christ, that's a completely different beast. Trading on anything you hear in there is privileged information. They know we were in there. There's cameras, there's records. And Harper is now like, okay, but like, how is an SEC FCA investigation going to put anything together based on that? It would be speculative at best. We took a meeting and placed a short. Lock us up, throw the key. Now she's acting a little bit like a toddler, where she's like, she knows she did something wrong. And she's like, Petra's frazzled.
I will say again, back to our point from last episode about David Einhorn and his meeting with Aaron Callan. You take a meeting with the CFO and you place a big short. They went into a meeting with Pierpoint and they decided to place a big short. I actually think that meeting is what helps them. It's like to jump from it, be like, I heard this meeting and they seem like they have just like an absolute mess on their hands, and it made us draw this logical conclusion. That to me is a very reasonable paper trail to draw. To be like, no, we saw you walk into a bathroom and you must have then heard other information. So I actually think Harper's right. I think it's very hard to pin this on wrongdoing if they were to try to like connect those dots.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't think that they're going to have freaking cameras in the freaking bathrooms recording what people are saying on the toilet. I mean, talk about a freaking invasion of privacy. Having cameras in the women's bathroom? I would hope there's no cameras. Story. Yeah, seriously. So Petra is frazzled saying, you backed us into a major corner, and Harper says, I've said my piece. So the funny thing too is that like Harper didn't even come to her and say, I want to do Pierpoint because I heard this in the toilet. It was like, I want to investigate these different banks. And she didn't even want to buy Pierpoint or short Pierpoint. She wanted to do all the other banks because she wanted to save Harper. So really,
Yasmin.
They found out this information. Again, yes, she heard this, but like that, well, it might've been privileged. Like she didn't even want to like go after Pierpoint. She wanted to go after the other guys. So like, it was literally Petra who did that. So in that case, like it kind of was okay. I don't know.
Listen,
gray.
Harper, it is all gray. I mean, again, not someone who trades equities. So like, this is much more gray to me than like the Jesse Bloom thing was.
And the Jesse Bloom I thought was great too. Like all of these, exactly. Like, yeah.
I mean, Harper led Petra to water. I think Petra looking so shell-shocked here, the reason she looks so horrified is she has become effectively the useful idiot within their firm for Harper's machinations. But Harper led her to water and she drank it. And Harper like reluctantly led her to water. It was so I know they have done something wrong here, but I actually don't feel like they've done something wrong here, which is very complex.
I mean, I think because there's double standards with some of this stuff, back to current events, someone took out a Kalshi bet for $30,000 that Maduro was going to get replaced within 24 hours of him getting taken out and made over, I think it was like $500,000. And it's like, inside information much? Just coincidence? And that isn't even traceable.
How do you even regulate that? I mean, I've never used Kalshi or any of these betting things.
Yeah.
For two people who talk about investing, we are like the most risk-averse people in the world. Okay.
All right. Next thing, we're back at the Pierpoint board meeting. And someone says, people damn Lehman because of poor risk management in one area, housing derivatives. And then we find out this is Michael Stone guy. But we benefited hugely from acquiring the bond trading and EM business, emerging, which stands for emerging markets. I'm sure a Pierpoint suite will be similarly exciting synergistically for us. Tom says we can give the market the signal that this is happening and allay the share price, stave off any more panic, and give us some breathing room. Adler then is, because he doesn't want this, he wants to be the one who's like the white horse and brokers the deal. So he starts to prod and he's like, can I ask, would BB Barclays Pierpoint or Pierpoint Barclays? Wilhelmina says, we care about the cosmetics. And Adler replies, you should care about the weight of my name. Tom, again, they also kind of like,
no, he says, as someone who's been here longer than a fortnight, you should care about the weight of our name.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. And so that is in reference to Tom, who just got there. So he says, if you're addressing me.
While they're having this conversation, Adler's like this. He's not even looking at Tom, who's behind him at the head of the table. So there's this body language thing that's happening that's totally subversive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Tom says, if you're addressing me, could you look me in the face, please? Do we care about saving the name or saving the jobs of the people who work for us? Adler says, maybe you can tell us, or maybe our potential suitor is best to answer that question. The Barclays CEO then says, you guys are trading off of a 150-year reputation, which we respect, of course, but practically we are interested in your infrastructure. Time is as of the essence. I'm going to make a few phone calls. That is, if you're still interested. And Tom smiles and he says, please. Now, as the Barclays CEO leaves, Tom says to Adler, tell me, how was that not inappropriate? To which Adler replies, what is inappropriate about not drilling down on what this guy means by our infrastructure? Is that our tech, our terminals? Is it the building that we own in Midtown? Which, back to the Lehman point, Tom says, I'm sure that will be shaken out. Adler says, what we need is a capital injection. So we're not backed into a corner, into a deal, not on our terms. Wilhelmina says, it's a Band-Aid. A Band-Aid is not a solution. Adler says, Mitsubishi will tide us over. They want us to be us with no stipulations. Wilhelmina says, there's no such thing as free money. Let's pause here. I was so on the side of Adler. Let's talk about what happened to Morgan Stanley. In late 2007, this whole financial crisis, like shit was going down. I remember when I was in training, because I started in 2007 on the CDO Structuring desk, which was literally the product that was at the heart of the entire financial crisis. The head of our training program, he was the head of institutional sales on the Morgan Stanley trading floor. And he was the head of...
Was it Steve D'Antonio?
No, maybe he was just head of securitized product sales. It could have been he was head of
SPG sales. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Because he's the one who gave me my offer.
I know exactly
he was Morgan Stanley.
Talking about.
Yeah, and he was a Brown alum. But so he was the head of our program, and clearly shit was starting to go bad. And he just was like, this no bullshit. And we would have people from like the other offices, like, because they would have all these different new hires from like London and Hong Kong and Australia all come to New York to do a training program. And they were kind of like, I don't want to sit in some class all day. I don't care. I'm going to roll in whenever I want. And they would often be late. And he was just like, you guys are so freaking lucky. You have no idea to have this job, blah, blah, blah. And he started to get pissed. I remember he had a thing where it's like, if anyone was late to training, he would make us come in an hour earlier. And there was a point where we were coming in at like 6:30 a.m. He's like, I'm in at 6:30 a.m. anyway. This is no big deal to me. Like, whatever.
That's a normal day for him.
But for like training, where you're still in this college mindset where, I mean, God, if you have a 9 a.m. class, you're crazy. That's the point. It's like shit was starting to feel like, okay, there's clouds on the horizon. Then we get on the desk, and I remember I'm in like CDO structuring, and there would be a round of layoffs, and you'd have HR come through. They would start to like get people. They would all start to leave. My group, by the way, so this is just the CDO structuring group, went from 40 down to 3. The securitized product group thinned out significantly. But when I started in 2007, shit was starting to go bad. So end of 2007, this is when we had like that rogue trader. And also there was about to be a lot of losses. So this is when they basically got a massive capital injection, $5 billion from CIC, again, Sovereign Wealth Fund in China. And they structured this actually the same way. And I looked it up how Lehman got their capital injection as a mandatory convert. Now, that was great. They got this nice liquidity injection, and then they had like horrible earnings in 2007. Then you have fucking Bear Stearns. And then you have Lehman. Like Lehman goes down, and then there was only 3 investment banks left. Merrill Lynch, who was one of the major investment banks, got sold to Bank of America. The 2 remaining banks were Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. And so everyone is basically watching them. And we talked about how the trade at the time was basically to short the stock and then to buy the underlying...
To buy CDS.
To buy CDS. The government put in a restriction that you could not short financial stocks, period. Not just that you couldn't short financial stocks, naked short, you couldn't short financial stocks, period, because they were trying to basically stop the bleeding. And this is funny because again, like there was all these converts and stuff, and like all the people who are convertible investors, they short the stock in order to protect themselves because what they basically want to buy is the volatility. So this is why you start to see a lot of these like convertible ARB hedge funds blow up during that time. But regardless, so that's when you had Morgan Stanley start to negotiate with Mitsubishi for this $9 billion. And it was actually convertible preferred, which is the same structure that was done with TARP funding. Financing was preferred. And then, like I said, those warrants, similar to how Warren Buffett invested as well. And so they signed this deal with Mitsubishi, where Mitsubishi, it was a little bit of equity, but it was mostly convertible preferred. So they raised common stock for like $25 a share. Remember, the share price was it traded down to like 7. Now, I do think that this was signed before it actually traded down, but then the conversion price was $31.25. Remember, again, Morgan Stanley share price had been like 50, 60, 70, traded down. I think it was like in the 20 range, dropped to 7 at one point when we were literally like, oh my God, we're going bankrupt, because we did have a day where everyone was just glued. It was like that day in October, but they struck it at that 35 because they were looking at this as a longer term investment with, by the way, a 10% dividend. Oh, and the other point though is for Mitsubishi, this was just like an interesting point. So in the show, they talked about how Mitsubishi would investing and getting 19% ownership, whereas in the Morgan Stanley deal, they got 21%. That 20% threshold is important for almost like a accounting governance standpoint. So Mitsubishi did get a board seat, but there was just, again, so many similarities to the fact that they also chose Mitsubishi. Like they chose the actual bank that did the freaking deal that saved Morgan Stanley. And I think that that's why, again, as someone who had worked at Morgan Stanley at the time, I was watching this just like, listen to fucking Adler. He's right. Get your freaking capital injection. Because by the way, Morgan Stanley got a $5 billion injection and then they went back and they got another freaking injection from somebody else. And you don't call them Mitsubishi Morgan Stanley. Like it was a capital injection. It was strategic in the sense that you had Mitsubishi wanted the expanded US presence, kind of similar to why Barclays did this deal, but they didn't buy it outright. So anyway, that's why, again, for me watching this, I am on this side of Adler being like, do the fucking deal. Do the Mitsubishi deal. That's so much smarter. And I feel like for you watching, you're like, oh my God, no, sell, like get out, like get the save. Oh,
no.
No,
not at all.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Them talking about, so the Barclays acquisition of Lehman was not good for Lehman people. Like it happened after we went bankrupt. So we can go through what ultimately ended up happening if you want. We can talk about it later. But when they're sitting here talking about they want our infrastructure, what the hell does that mean? And when Stone talks about the fact that buying the bond and emerging markets business was great. So remember, I sat on the fixed income trading floor. I sat on interest rates. The one thing that Barclays was good at, when they bought us, it was a bloodbath in fixed income sales and trading. If you were a Lehman person sitting in my seat, which is effectively Eric, Yasmin, all these people, they talk about them now in equities and they keep distancing themselves from
ECM.
Yeah. But like, if they were at ECM, by the way, they were actually probably fine because Barclays wasn't good at ECM. But the seat I was in was the people who were looking at this saying, yes, take the money from Mitsubishi. Because by the way, also the knock-on effect of the Mitsubishi investment from Morgan Stanley, when I ultimately went to work at Morgan Stanley 2 years later, right? The reason we had such a powerhouse of a vol desk was because we saw all the Japanese exotics. We saw all the Japanese callable issuance that was being done, and all of the options that came off the back of that then went through the exotics desk at Morgan Stanley in fixed income, and that desk was printing money. So like the Mitsubishi partnership had multiple knock-on effects beyond just a capital injection in terms of the long-term profitability of the bank. So like it was a home run all around. And I mean, Barclays, it was a great bank and I loved my time working there, but I watched basically everyone around me, much more talented and capable people, by the way, get shot effectively. And then I ended up there like alone, being like, what am I doing?
And you moved like 2 years later. So like,
And then I left 2 years later. I mean, it was not, of the three firms I worked for, it was simply not my favorite, but like Lehman was always my favorite. I think there's like something about, and you hear this romanticization from Adler and Eric. Some of it I do think is genuine, and much of that was felt by the people at Lehman at the time. Like this is this storied institution, and that's where they went wrong. They were too precious about it, rather than just being like, dude, any port in a storm, which is 100% why I'm watching. I think the Mitsubishi thing was great. Why would you ever? It's never great to be bought by someone. Like,
no, that's true. Well, the funny thing I should
who
add,
loves being acquired.
Yeah. Well, I was going to add, I should have noted this. The reason that I'm like so into just this stupid like converts shit is I was literally sitting on the converts desk. The MD next to me was working on the Mitsubishi deal, but it was like NTK, like nobody knew except for him. And then actually it was Arnaud, who is now the global head of equity capital markets. He was like the associate at the time and I loved him. He's this like wonderful associate and they were working on it. It was all super like hush hush, but this guy next to me, he had Sirkan, he had a freaking heart monitor because he was so stressed out about the whole thing. And then him and Arnaud were also working to advise the US Treasury on the TARP financing and the converts and the warrants and all the shit, because it was literally that structure. So that's why I was saying for me, like sitting in that seat was kind of so, and again, it was awful and it was like not great. Like people were fired, like banks went down, people lost their job. But like it was for me so cool because watching this product that like nobody gives a shit ever. And it literally is the thing that was like used to stop the madness. The guy sitting next to me is the one who's like working on the deal that's making this investment go through, that like is structuring it and pricing it and talking about it and in the negotiations. And so anyway, that was why for me, like, again, I think everyone remembers when like you're going through something crazy and you're working at the firm that's Jen again, was literally at Lehman Brothers when it went under. And especially for us, it was, I mean, in my case, the year after I started fucking working. And it was literally months after my brother started. My brother sat on the trading floor with me across from me. And I remember I could like look up and be like, hi, but it was like, we all started and this crazy thing happened. And it's like, at the time you realize it's crazy, but like also even now it's like, no, the global financial crisis was a big fucking deal. And so to start your career, and I say this all the time, that it's like, this is why I think I am, and both of us are, so risk averse. I do think that probably does play a part, but I think when you start and you see people whose money was tied up in like these stocks and it all fucking traded to zero and people's massive amounts of wealth got wiped out, you're like, holy shit, I'm not putting my money into equities. Like that's how I've been. I was always so conservative because I'm like, I just saw what happened. And the irony is like, you get wealthy usually by like taking some risk and like actually assuming that usually, I mean, more often than not, things will work out. If things don't work out, it does seem like the freaking government does step in. But like, again, I feel like you and I maybe learned some of the wrong lessons, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
the next scene that we get after Wilhelmina says there's no such thing as free money, Stone comes back in the room and says, we will thrash out a palatable acquisition multiple for all parties, but I guess now we can shake hands. That's pending dotting the I's and crossing the T's for the regulator, and we'll pen an announcement to cushion the share price. I had a question for you. Wouldn't Barclays want the share price to fall as far as possible before acquiring the thing? Or is it like, let's stop the bleeding?
It was like
so
the
that
Morgan...
we're not buying an asset where like all of a sudden everyone's unwound all their positions.
Well, if you look at, for example, with the Mitsubishi deal, and I remember thinking like, why are you doing it at such a high conversion price? And it was because this was looked at as a long-term investment. They were not going to be like, we're just going to like let you get screwed. We're going to invest with what we think is fair. So I think it was less about, I want to pick up a distressed asset for pieces, which kind of is like what Barclays did. They were like,
this is Barclays. This is a totally different scenario that we're talking about here.
Yeah, but I still think you want some of that goodwill. They could do what Barclays did to you guys and be like, we're going to let you fail and we're going to pick up what we want for pieces after the fact. Like that,
yeah,
they could do that.
I don't think Barclays was like, oh, goody.
I know that's not what they meant to. I know that wasn't why they did it. But I think once people assume something's bad, I think that's,
that's my read on it. They didn't want the share. It's not about the price for the acquisition purposes. It's more like, we just want to stop the bleeding in this company so that we're not buying something that no one ever wants to do business with.
Yeah. Eric looks a bit stunned, and Adler also looks confused and says, this is what death feels like, 150 years to build it, which does feel interesting that he's talking about death of his like firm, and we know he's like about to die himself. Eric replies, 2-minute phone call to bring it all down. So Wilhelmina then comes over to Eric after people have kind of left, confiding in Eric, saying, Bill can't behave like that when the rest of the Barclays management comes in. Eric replies, he has our best interest at heart. She says, has he promised you the world if he comes out on top? And Eric says, he has a habit of doing that. And she asks, why is he turning this into a political zero-sum game? These factions are child play. If we play this right and quell the infighting, everyone in this room will be safe. Eric asks, do I count as in the room? She replies, get in Bill's ear. That's how you count. Bring him to heel. Convince him not to embarrass us in front of these people who are offering us a lifeline. You don't buy that BS about the workforce, do you? Eric looks at her kind of like, kind of. And she says, the guy usually pops a chub for reducing headcount. He's weaponizing them. He's self-interested. He just wants to play Christ with the Mitsubishi plan. We both know it's not going to work. And as far as he's concerned, you're a useful idiot. I do think that he might have like motivations that are pure and blah, blah, blah. I still think that the freaking Mitsubishi plan was the best freaking plan. And she's shitting on it because she wants to be the one that brokers the Barclays deal.
Of course. They are all just jockeying for power, right? She and Tom are very aligned with this Barclays plan. And they know that if this goes through, they are going to be in great political positioning. And Bill and anyone who supported him are going to be sidelined. So she's trying to basically use Eric as, even though she calls Bill the useful idiot, she's trying to use Eric as the useful idiot to then be in Bill's ear to poison this deal to benefit her. Wilhelmina does not, she ain't here to play. She is going to do whatever it is. She is very she's Cersei Lannister, right? Like she will do whatever serves her. Yeah. So I think it's just really interesting that all of a sudden now Eric is being positioned as the useful idiot in the episode after it was Yasmin in the last one. But the question is Eric really being manipulated by Adler, or does he truly believe that he can do what's best for the workforce by enacting Adler's plan? Or is this all part of some scheme where Eric is double dealing and blah, blah, blah? So I think it's really interesting that they've set up these stakes where Eric looks like he has no agency and is a pawn with all of these higher ups pulling the strings, where he's like, do I even count as in the room? He wouldn't be in the room if it weren't for Bill. And so here he is now. And all of a sudden, everything seems to hinge upon him.
Yep. So anyway, she walks away and then we're in the next scene. So now we're with Yaz, who was looking at the list of women, because obviously Max in the center, that screenshot. And the one person that she sees who we recognize is Teresa, the woman who is like the mom of her now, I guess, half sister. And Yaz in the tub. Her former nanny. Yeah. And Yaz in the tub, and she realizes that the mushrooms are there, and she basically just takes all of them. And so we're like, well, this isn't going to end well. Now, from here, we then are in the next scene with Petra, who is calling Otto. By the way, Otto is here polishing one of his 50 antique cars.
By the way, it's 4 a.m. What is he doing in his garage, polishing his cars at 4 a.m?
Seriously? Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. But maybe he's in New York. But then...
No, he's definitely not in New York.
Yeah, you're right. So she says, I feel terrible about going behind her back, but I need my working relationships to be predicated on trust. And on that basis, I think it's becoming untenable with Harper. Otto says, you're one of my best performing projects. What happened? Petra says she's being reckless with their AUM. Otto asks, reckless how? And Petra says, legally. He asks, you mean she's being reckless with my money? That is simply something I cannot countenance. So Petra's kind of stabbing Harper a little bit in the back right now, but whatever.
100%. But like, it's defensible that she's doing this because she doesn't want to go to jail. It's not worth it. But you would logically assume from watching this that Otto's going to be pissed because this is a man who's up in the middle of the night polishing his cars. This is probably a man who doesn't want 1 cent unaccounted for. So in my mind, I'm thinking as I'm watching this, I'm like, dude, Otto's coming for Harper. Like, Harper better watch her back.
Yes. So the next thing, we're back at Pierpoint, and Adler is yelling at Wilhelmina, saying he's sick of talking around the fact that Wilhelmina is purely to blame for Pierpoint's insolvency. She says it was agreed upon by a committee, and he says it's only a committee after it failed. Mike Stone, then the CEO of Barclays, comes back and he says he has bad news. We need significantly more time to get in line with the regulator. And Tom says, we don't have any more time. Talk straight. What's going on? Mike says, between us, I just got off the phone with the chancellor. He understands the gravity of the situation, but can't be seen to be ratifying an effective bailout of another bank. He's on thin ice as it is, and he's got this bloody caucus of populist Tory bench backers making his life hell. So yeah, sorry I can't be of more help. I also wonder if part of this is Otto being like, I have a short against this. Let this fucking bank fail. You know, I assume you took the same thing. Tom says,
because of the next scene, I didn't necessarily take it just from this.
Yeah, same. Tom says, so we're at the mercy of someone else's ambition. And Mike replies, aren't we always? Best of luck. Which I actually liked that comment.
Beautiful.
Like, aren't we always? Scene. Like, everyone is always. Yeah.
Applause.
Yay. And Tom just screams, fuck.
Adler winks at Eric while Tom's having his crash out.
That's a good catch there. So now we get to the scene that I was talking about, which is like why we realize like what actually happened behind the scenes. So
or I think what we're led to infer, which it took me to, I didn't get this until the second watch because I was a little bit confused by this. So I might need your help with this scene.
Okay. So the next scene, someone says, this is what we have at the moment. And it's a newspaper article that says Barclays to buy Pierpoint 150. We then see newspaper guy, a random dude, and Aurora. She says the chancellor now looks like an ally of the financial sector's lawlessness and weak for kowtowing to a group of influential backbenchers. Newspaper guy says, led by his successor. Aurora says, are we ready for that move? Because remember, she wants to now become like in as prime minister. Newspaper guy says maybe after the election, which actually has me wondering if he's like almost using her as the useful idiot, that he may never actually try to back her as chancellor, but she was the useful idiot in the prior episode. I don't know.
It's quite possible.
We don't know yet. We have to see what happens.
But then his next line is, but these headlines won't hurt your chances.
Yes.
I thought it was like, here's how we're prepping.
He then shows her a revised article that reads, Adetunle breaks the bank. He then hands this like almost like an iPad to some guy and says, thanks for staying late. Let's have this up before the country wakes up. Basically like, now go run this. And random guy gets up and Aurora smiles. So
I just want to be clear, and I may have missed this. Are they suggesting that Aurora is the one who is satisfying this populist urge to like not bail out the banks?
I don't think so.
Is the name of the existing chancellor?
That's my assumption.
What is?
But they were saying we're going to turn people against these centrists. So they're going to let these centrist things over.
No, is her last name.
Huh.
So that's why I was like, wait a minute. They're giving, and that's why these headlines matter for her. They're giving her credit for putting the kibosh on this deal.
Okay.
So that's what, I was a
little
confused.
I thought she didn't have any influence anymore. She's out of power.
She has stepped down from being the energy secretary. This is what I'm saying. She was on the healthcare committee. Then she's the energy secretary. She stepped down from being energy secretary. Now she's in the mix, but this is like 3 days later. She's putting the kibosh on the Barclays Pierpoint merger as like a no bailouts for banks, which is, I think, is how they're going to position her to then take power. Because she's the voice of good and reason, even though, and this is where I figured the double cross comes in effectively. It's like they are doing this to put a nice package on it for like the people who are like, no more bailouts for banks with her ascending to power while benefiting Otto Short.
That makes sense.
The key thing was that was her last name. And I
didn't know that, so that makes sense.
Just literally Googling. I don't know why I was so lazy. Sorry.
To me, it didn't even cross my mind that it could have been her last name. I just thought it was like the actual guy that was in there, but this all makes sense. Okay. So the next scene, we're back at the Pierpoint trading floor.
It is total debauchery on the trading floor.
Yeah. Sorry. That's what
there are people everywhere. Everyone's drinking, partying. We find out that Anraj is on ecstasy.
Which is so not Anraj-like.
It's so not Anraj-like, but there were echoes of what it actually felt like the night of September 14th, 2008. Now, this is the Hollywood version, but let's go through the scene and then we can talk about.
Wait, Jen, you weren't on ecstasy?
No.
Rishi goes up to Sweet Pea and Anraj, who are wasted, and asks, have you sold the rest of my effing positions? Sweet Pea says, where have you been? And he makes a joke and says, I've been, whatever, doing something with the client. Sweet Pea tells him that some guy keeps calling the desk. And Rishi asks who, and she says, Vinay? Rishi's like, he's calling here. And Anraj is acting crazy. This is where we find out that he is also on ecstasy. Anraj then goes up to Rishi, all lovey-dovey, being like, you bully me because you were bullied in school. Rishi is actually sober and asks, why didn't you sell my axes? Sweet Pea says, we're not going to play Santa wrapping coal and bows for your clients. We're not going to torch a reputation in the market selling your worthless positions. Why would we? To what end? Rishi then just says, best of luck drowning, and he walks off the desk.
There's a lot in here. When Anraj is wasted and kind of gives Rishi this bear hug and gives him this line that sounds like it came from his therapist. Like, you bully me because you were bullied at school, right? It's clearly someone has told him like hurt people. And we see this thing that has been developing all season where Rishi thinks he just has banter with Anraj. Anraj is legitimately hurt by everything that Rishi says and does. And Anraj clearly wants Rishi to love him and respect him and like him and deeply cares about that father-son mentor thing. And Rishi, we see actually does care about Anraj through that initial attempt to take him with them, right? But it all is falling apart here. And this looming menace of Vinay calling the desk, this like escalating, the bell is tolling, just like the bell is tolling for Pierpoint. The bell seems to be tolling for Rishi. The bell is tolling, like time is up kind of for everyone here. And I don't love this plot line with the gambling thing. Like I was kind of hoping they had just like left it in the Rishi episode and that it could be just like a nice little tied up with a bow and then we just never have to hear about it again. But the menace of Vinay is still very much lurking here. But I want to talk about like the portrayal of midnight on the trading floor here as things are totally going to shit and what it was actually like. So September 14th, 2008, while the government and all the heads of all the banks and the Federal Reserve and everyone are like together trying to figure out what's going to happen in the 11th hour and 59th minute, what it was actually like being a Lehman employee at the time. So remember, I come back from this vacation with this boyfriend. By the way, like the demise of our relation, like we were also like, man, maybe we should see other people and not each other. So like, you know, we're breaking, like everything feels like it's happening at once. So like, that's kind of how these things go, right? It does all happen at once. And so that day was a Sunday. I remember going to a bar and watching the Patriots play and having like an absurd amount of beer and chicken wings. So I get back to my apartment and I'm tired and I'm in my pajamas and I'm like still kind of drunk from being at the bar. And I'm sauteing vegetables in my pajamas. And my dad calls me and he's like, you need to get to the office immediately. And it's 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, they're going to lock the doors. And at the time, as a newly promoted associate, my entire net worth was tied up in like 3 pairs of Jimmy Choo's and Manolo Blahniks I had under my desk. So I was like, shit. And I was like, no one will be there, right? Because I hadn't turned on the news. And so in my pajamas, I run over because I lived in Times Square. We both lived right around the corner from both Lehman and Morgan Stanley.
50th and 8th, baby.
Exactly. And so I ran over to the Lehman office still in my pajamas. I go inside. And the floor is packed. It doesn't look like this, where there's like people having sex in a glass-walled conference room, but everyone is hugging and crying. And you would have people who had these like very fancy bottles of wine or whiskey or whatever under their desk that they had saved for like a special occasion or as a client gift or something like that. And so they were breaking all that open, all that liquor. So everyone is wasted. Everyone's crying. That is like totally accurate in terms of the representation. And this is where it comes back to the trash bag thing. So everyone had brought in those, I don't know where they got the memo to like go to Home Depot and get those banker boxes to clear out their desks. I didn't get that memo and I'm wasted in my pajamas. So this is back to the janitors. They had just changed the trash bags. So I took a fresh trash bag out of my trash can and started putting all of my belongings into that trash bag. And at that point, now it's midnight, 1 a.m, whatever. And they're like, dude, like, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but like, at that point, CNBC and everyone is like, Lehman is going down. And so I took my trash bag, slung it over my shoulder like an orphan, little Disney orphan, and walked out the front doors. And my, again, then boyfriend, soon to be ex-boyfriend at the time, like called me and he was like, dude, the cameras caught you like walking out of Barclays. They were like sad, bedraggled Lehman employee, like clutching her earthly belongings in a trash bag or whatever. We still need to find that video, by the way. But so, yes. And we all went over to the head of mortgage trading's apartment, which was like walking distance, partied there until 4 or 5 in the morning. And then it was like, we got this email being like, show up at your desks in the morning. It is business as usual unless you are told otherwise. So I went home, showered, I think, put on a black dress, still dry. I've been drinking now for like 24 hours. Like put on, I was like, I gotta look fancy, right? I got really dressed up to go back to work the morning of September 15th. And it was like, Lehman declares bankruptcy. And you've been on these trading floors, you know, these scenes where Eric is on the trading floor or to anyone who's ever worked on a trading floor, these scenes where they're there at night and it's deadly quiet are so eerie, because if you've ever worked on one of these trading floors, especially back in the day when much more like voice inquiries used to happen versus now a lot more is executed electronically, it was a very loud place all the time. There was always something happening, phones ringing, people typing, people yelling, whatever. And it was dead silent, even though everyone was at their desks. So it was this funereal atmosphere. So the partying is 100% true. That 100% happened. That's not fiction. The sex in the office rooms, like that, at least that wasn't me. Like, so that didn't happen. And then we came back to work on the 16th, although a lot fewer people came back to work on the 16th and on the 17th. But what happened is we were still kind of like pretending that we had jobs because we'd received this email being like, show up to work unless otherwise instructed to, because we didn't know what was going to happen. And so at this point, Bank of America buys Merrill Lynch. Everyone else gets all these deals done. We've gone under, it's like a morgue. Everyone's updating their resumes. A lot of my coworkers already are going out and doing interviews. And so a lot of the seats are empty. And we're sitting there on the morning of, I guess it was Wednesday, September 17th, it must have been. I don't remember this timeline. I had to like look up the dates and I was like, it was only 48 hours later.
Because I remember Morgan Stanley going down like days after Lehman. So I was like, Lehman collapsed in October. And it's like, no. And I'm like, whoa, what happened to those 2 weeks?
September 15th. Yeah, exactly.
But in my head, it's all the same day. Like I swear to God, I remember walking home from my parents visiting us in New York City. Again, me and my brother are both working at Morgan Stanley. I live near the office. He like lives down in Tribeca, but like looking at the newspaper where it says like Lehman goes under and you're just like, holy shit. Although maybe it was like Merrill gets bought by Bank of America. I don't remember. I just remember that it was like
same day. That both happened September 15th.
Yeah. So I don't know what happened to the 2 weeks. Cause like in my head, that was in October.
Well, I actually think you might be thinking of another instance that did happen in October and November that we can talk about that a lot of people forget about. So I'm there, I'm sitting there like polishing up my resume, and my boss, like all these people, like, we're going to go to Citi, we're going to go to Nomura, like, we'll take you with, you know, all these factions start developing, right? Of like, who's going to go where? Don't worry, I got you. But like, everyone's also kind of looking out for themselves, which I think is really interesting how they kind of depicted this. And all of a sudden, the equity guys were at the other end of the floor. And I see this like huge commotion going on. Like, and of course, I'm the most junior person in the row at the time. And they're like, Jen, go find out what's going on. So I exit the row and start walking, you know, again, it's like a football field, right? So like these guys are so far away, we can't even hear what they're doing. And so I start walking down the row. And as I get to where the double doors, we talked about those glass doors with like the push to exit and the fob. As I get to the glass doors, they burst open. And all of a sudden, these men in suits start walking in. And I was like, who the fuck is this? And they start walking at me. And I was like, ah! I turned around. I'm 22 years old. I turned around and start like walking briskly back to my desk, and they follow me. And I was like, what the frick is going on? Like, who are these people? What have I done? And I go back to my desk, and these men come down the row, and I didn't recognize any of them at the time. And they went to the hoot next to mine, which belonged to Ann Villasuso at the time, who's now at Boa Portfolio here in Charlotte. But anyways, and she was out interviewing for another job at the time, I think. And they turn on the hoot, and the guy goes, this is Bob Diamond. So it was the CEO of Barclays. And he goes, we just bought Lehman Brothers. And the men in suits behind him, one of them turns to me, and I don't exactly know who it was, but again, this was like the C-suite of Barclays. And he turns to me and he goes, you guys don't stand a fucking chance. Because I was part of fixed income sales and trading. And I didn't get the joke at the time that like this meant that they didn't want us. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like we were the people to go. So the next 30 days were effectively, or the next 2 weeks really, were everybody having to interview for their own job at the firm.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember I was like, they're not going to take me. I'm the world's shittiest associate. Like, this isn't going to happen. So I went and interviewed at Goldman Sachs, and I was on the Goldman Sachs trading floor the day that they announced that Warren Buffett made the big investment in Goldman Sachs. And I went and interviewed at Deutsche Bank, and I was on Deutsche Bank the day that the S&P hit 666. I remember looking up at the TV screen, and they were like ringing the bells like this just happened. And so I was interviewing for jobs all over. I filled out an application to the Culinary Institute of America. I was like, maybe I'll become a chef. Like, I can't cook for shit. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was like, I'll go discover myself. All my friends are getting blown out of various hedge funds, various firms. They're all putting together their business school applications. And I was going through a breakup with this guy who I had been dating at Lehman. And I was just like coming to work every morning, like in tears, like doing all these interviews. And so I didn't get called in to interview with Barclays until the very last day of interviews. And I was the last interview with Kashmir, who was the head of sales at the time. And it was 3 p.m. on a Friday. And he was like, let's make this quick. I got to go like meet my wife in the Hamptons. And I was like, I'm not getting this job because the guy who went in ahead of me was another guy my year in rate sales. And he was like the Treasury bond basis guru. And I was like, oh, I got to follow him, like Mr. Genius, who's a Treasury relative value expert and should be running his own hedge fund. Like, I don't stand a chance. So I went in assuming I wasn't going to get this job and just was like, yeah, whatever. And we ended up talking for 3 hours. He took a phone call with his wife during the interview, by the way. Like, I was like, can you just hang a second? I want to keep chatting. And then like took a call with his wife, then hung up. Then we kept chatting. We chatted from 3 p.m. until 6 p.m. At which point he was like, I missed my train to the Hamptons or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
And so I got the job. And my then boss goes, what on earth did you say in that interview? And I was like, I have no idea. And virtually no one else from my row ended up coming to Barclays at the beginning. It was like either they just got fired or they took offers elsewhere and it was like a mutual whatever. But when I showed up at Barclays, it was maybe 10-1 Barclays people to Lehman people. And it was really, really hard at the beginning. But anyways, that is what it was actually like at the time. So it was, dare I say, even more dramatic for a regular human being like me than they're showing in this.
Well, but in fairness, I mean, not to give away the spoiler, they don't actually go bankrupt. So I think that's, you know, they basically are Morgan Stanley. That's why I'm saying Pierpoint is Morgan Stanley. They just don't end up going with Mitsubishi. And actually it's not because it's like Morgan Stanley was like basically saved.
Actually,
Pierpoint
they really are Barclays. And I'll tell you why at the end, because you've probably forgotten what happened in October, November.
Okay. But I was going to say, I mean, basically Morgan Stanley is what could have happened to them. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I'm like,
they could have been fine. They could have been fine.
So many ways to lose.
So many ways to lose. Yes, Pierpoint could have been fine.
So, all right. So the next scene, we're back over the Pierpoint board meeting and someone asked what time it is. And they say it's 4 a.m. So there is 10 hours until the US Open. Tom says, put a fucking solution in front of me. So Adler says the Mitsubishi is still in play and he can wake the head of their London office. He says they want this as much as we do. Wilhelmina says the solve is not viable long-term given the state of his balance sheet. Again, like now I'm annoyed with her. Adler says this is to assuage the market's fears. All that matters is that we can plug the immediate hole. Tom says, why do you keep talking when the value of our deals is less than zero? But I guess he changes his mind.
No, he's saying this to Wilhelmina.
Oh, got it.
Tom is totally soured on Wilhelmina at this point because his great idea of Barclays is now shot down.
Yes.
Wilhelmina did get them into this mess. And he's like, dude, enough of you, right?
Okay.
Like, stop.
Got it. That makes more sense. I'm like, why is he saying that? Because then he doesn't about face where I thought he did, but actually this makes complete sense. He says, we need to pivot. Mitsubishi, wake them up, get them in the room. And Adler snaps up and he's like all excited. And he like goes and he speaks on the phone in Japanese and he says it's done. And he like looks at Eric. We then see Adler saying, it's a good thing that Tom said, yes, I soft launched this to Mitsubishi's European Executive Committee already. They're going to come with terms that Tom finds attractive. Okay. Now they're going to come with terms that Tom finds attractive. I've prepped them on the financials, so let's take a fast 20, call an associate up in IBD to triple check the numbers in the deck. No missteps. Eric says a fast 20 still takes 20. But I mean, this is so true. The numbers being right, and we saw this actually in the very first episode with our poor friend who dies, but the numbers being right in a meeting like this is of paramount importance because it can make or break a deal.
Culturally, with a Japanese bank,
yes,
there are significant cultural differences between Japanese investment professionals and American. This is one of the things that they prep you on, right? Like how to accept a business card properly, like how to do all these things, and respect those cultural differences because they really do matter.
Yes, but again, it's like culturally at IBD, you do not make a mistake like this either. Now, in the next scene, we're back with Robert and Yasmin. You hear someone screaming out. And so Robert barges into the room and she's just like bleeding and saying she wanted to make a cup of tea. Robert is like, what have you done? She's totally out of it because she's taken all these freaking mushrooms. And she keeps saying, do you think I'm a bad person? And he's like, you're not a bad person. She's like, tell me I'm allowed to want to do bad things. And Robert's just like, what are you talking about? And she tries to seduce him and he just is like, stop. Like, he's like, stop. Like the way that you would tell a toddler, like, stop. And she makes some like gross comment about Henry and Robert's just there, just like hugging her, like, calm down. Again, it reminds me of how you would be with a toddler. It's like, you're like firm. And then it's like, you just like give hugs, it's just like you try to calm them down. I feel like he is just, to your point, being so parental and like just comforting, but stern. Like he's so wonderful in this scene, or not in the scene, but in this whole episode. Like he is just so wonderful to her. Now, next scene, this is like one of the important ones. We're back at Pierpoint, and Eric and Tom are like next to each other in a urinal.
In the men's bathroom. The men's room. Important scenes happen in the bathroom. When you see a bathroom in industry, you're supposed to pay attention. Yeah.
Tom says, Bill's told me that you've been here for 30 years. Aren't you bored? Tom says he's been dropped into a number of these restructurings since obviously like he was working at Bain. He says they all have their own mythos and history, but ultimately they're corporations. Eric says, not the people. The people are different. Tom says, are they really? There's a self-centeredness at the heart of Bill's romanticization of it all. Honestly, actually, you know what I just thought of? I wonder if part of it is like he feels like if he can save Pierpoint, like he can save himself. Yes. He is fighting so hard because he has cancer and he wants to make it. And him making it is Pierpoint making it,
Yes, no, think about how they structure these good bank, bad bank deals. They literally talk about it cutting out the cancer, right? Bill has a malignant tumor, right? There's a malignant tumor within this bank. The question is can it be excised? And who is it, right? So it's no mistaking that here. I totally agree.
Yeah. So false heroism. Do you think there's room for nobility in there? And he zips up and he goes and washes his hands next to Eric. And Tom continues, I was hoping Bill would be my mouthpiece to the wider Pierpoint family, but he seems like more of a problem than a solution. Eric is like drying his hands and kind of thinking. And Tom says, you aren't a romantic, are you? What do you believe in? Eric says, I don't.
And at this point, by the way, when someone says, what do you believe in? There is that famous speech in Bull Durham that Kevin Costner gives. And like, oh God, like you've got to go back and watch Bull Durham. We like talked about this after we met Kevin Costner. Like
I know, but I still have never seen it.
One of the best movies of all times. And so immediately that cues up, what does Eric really believe in? And I think this is where it all comes out.
And so Eric says, I don't believe in anything. I believe in the trade, when it works, when it stops working. Tom says, by the way, nostalgia is only useful when you're selling something, and he walks out. Now, I'm just curious.
This was the speech that Eric was trying to give to Yasmin in the steak restaurant. Because I went back and thought about that, right? It's what do you believe in? Because now is Eric's chance to say what he has learned about himself in the last 3 seasons. He believes in the trade. He is practical. And last week he was talking to Yasmin and he was like, desire is practical.
Yeah.
That conversation happened right after he was asking her about her relationship with Henry Muck. And I think it was, okay, listen, these two institutions are in bed together. It's very, actually like, it's not such a leap to think that like you might take that, metaphor and take it literally. And you got in bed with Henry Muck. Desire is practical. I can understand how these situations put these people together. That's what I actually think. I think this episode tells us what Eric had been trying to say. Desire is practical. Eric's desire and his ambition are practical. If the trade isn't working, it's time to stop out and not get emotional about it. And he is having this revelation in his mind. This is where he is. We have finally seen Eric coming into his whole self in this moment right here in the bathroom, because that's where everyone always has their big revelations in industry.
Yes, seriously.
So I love this because he is done romanticizing these father, son, daughter, mentee, mentor relationships, right? It is now, what is the trade? And so it's funny because who says that? It's Harper, right?
Yes.
Slowly become Harper.
Yep. So Bill walks in and says, any color that will help us with the pitch. Eric says, nope, a whole lot of nothing. Obviously, yes. And so
but he's looking at the deck.
Yes, Eric is looking over the numbers. I will say there was a few things I was like looking at. It's like they had the PE ratio. They don't have price to book, which they should have had for a financial institution because their assets
they had price to sales. I saw.
Yeah, price to sales is, I mean, again, like, it's fine that they have some of these numbers, I guess, but like,
you're saying it's wrong. I was so excited for you to break this down.
Well, the price to book value is the main metric that banks trade off of. That's book value of equity. Like, you have the market value of equity and the book value of equity. The price to book value for most industries is a meaningless, worthless number. But for a bank, because the assets and liabilities get marked to market every quarter, then the price that you are trading relative to that marked to market equity value is actually meaningful, and fair value is around like 1. But so you would typically have price to book for a financial institution. So I did think it was like slight oversight that they didn't have that. They did have, to your point, PE ratio, price of sales. I was annoyed that they had like a negative for the negative number. It should be like in parentheses, again, all these little things. But Adler asked, deck look good to your eyes? And Eric says, perfect. I'll see you out there. But you can tell
he's looking in the mirror, totally deadpan when he says perfect. And he almost looks terrified.
Yeah. So the next scene is the meeting with Mitsubishi. You see the people walk in and you hear the phone buzzing. It's Eric's phone. And he says that he needs to take this.
I tried so hard. I zoomed in. I did everything to try to see the caller ID and I could not see it.
Yeah.
I mean, we find out who it was, but like,
Yeah. And so Eric walks out to take the call. Adler is walking in and it's like, where are you going? And Eric's just like, I have to take this. So as he answers the phone, he says, thanks for calling me back. Sorry, it's early. Bill Adler told me about the connection that landed you on my desk. Can you flesh that out for me a little? And so we found out who.
Like it's the guy who has been placed on his desk so mysteriously.
The first time I watched, I didn't make that connection. I wasn't watching that closely. So when at the end he walks, I'm like, holy shit. So then from here, we go back with Yaz and Robert and they're checking out. And the woman that Yaz thought was hitting on Robert is there. And she's like, sees like, Yaz bleeding and asks if she can get a bandage. And as she turns around, she has, I feel like we kind of call it a tramp stamp here in the US where it's like you have a tattoo in your lower back and it just says Libra. And Yaz makes the joke, like, reckon she's a Libra. Robert just ignores her because again, this woman is being like lovely to her and she's just like being a bitch.
And Yasmin is being cruel to her again.
Yeah. He says he threw in an extra 20 quid for the busted kettle and then says cheers. And she wishes them a safe trip. But to your point, she's like being like lovely.
All of Yasmin's interactions throughout the episode thus far have been her being her worst. She is so unnecessarily cruel to this other woman. She keeps trying to blow things up with Robert. She like thinks that she still acts like she's operating from this position of power and leverage. And like, she is not nice to other women when she feels like they're coming from her stuff. She feels like this woman is somehow threatening her with Robert. And she thinks that there's this like flirtation and being cruel to her. And she's just straight up being awful.
Yeah. All right. So the next scene, they're back at the meeting with Mitsubishi. And Adler says, our proposal is that Mitsubishi Financial Group, MUFG, invests $9 billion in Pierpoint for a 19% interest in the company on a fully diluted basis. Now, one of the Mitsubishi like pulls out a Red Bull, which is like just under the seat. Because by the way, they've like been hinting that like it's ripe in the room, like it's gross because like they've all been in there.
And
it smells like a bunch of like guys.
Like they were like and everything.
Exactly. But there's like a Red Bull can right under. So like obviously kind of grossing out the Mitsubishi guys already.
Just not a good look, especially culturally.
No. Adler is like, oh my God, how did that get in there? And Adler goes on to say, our friends at Mitsubishi are the best partners we could have. They have enough dry powder to buy up our distressed debt and support the other assets on our books. And they want us to be us. They have reverence for our name. And one of the guys at Mitsubishi says, we want to build Pierpoint back to what it could be in its 150th year. Eric says, we expect a very healthy ROI for you on a decade-long horizon, which by the way, Mitsubishi had said in the Morgan Stanley thing that they expected to like be invested for 10 to 20 years. So I just want to say that. But of course, apologies for the small inaccuracy on page 12. And Adler makes a face like, what? And they all turn to that page. Someone says,
because of course you say that and everyone's like, what inaccuracy? Now I got to go find it.
Someone says, what reference? The Mitsubishi guy says, I assume this reference is linked incorrectly. It looks like you are linking to enterprise value instead of equity value. It is causing a 15% decrease in the true PE multiple, which again, that is not the multiple that you would talk about for the bank, but that's okay, which would otherwise be 7.6 times, well below the peers.
Okay, so what does this mean?
We literally did a reel today where it was talking about like the value of the entire firm versus the value of just the equity. So like when you think about the different types of multiples, there's enterprise value multiples and equity multiples. So when you're doing a equity multiple, I always use the analogy of like, you need to be compared as apples to apples. It should be like equity to earnings per share, to net income, to anything that is available to just the equity holders, versus if you were doing a enterprise value multiple, then it should be relative to sales, relative to EBITDA, relative to EBIT, basically anything that is available to all capital holders, including the debt holders, preferred, et cetera. And so a mistake would be you are basically using in the numerator, the enterprise value, and then earnings in the denominator. But again, typically when you're doing this, there's a difference between the share price and then the grossed up equity, and then the total value of the entire firm. There is no concept of like enterprise value per share. That is not a thing. So I don't know how you would get to like an enterprise value on a per share basis, because that's like, because with the P multiple, it's literally share price over expected earnings per share. To accidentally pull like the enterprise value in the numerator when it should be a P multiple and it's relative to earnings per share, like that's not something that you would typically make a mistake by.
Got it.
Does that make sense a little bit? Like I have to like break this up, but
it does. No, I was so excited about. I was like, oh yay, we get a chance to talk about like the stuff
yeah,
that we all the
dorky
time,
stuff.
Talk about is the yes. So the PE multiple again, they said was 8.9, and then the correct number apparently should be 7.6. Mm-hmm. So what they then say is, if you want to get into it,
Adler then says, "I'm so sorry we missed this. That's like a 2 to 3% uplift in IRR." And then Tom pipes in saying,
"So what does that mean?" What I thought they were trying to say is basically, "Hey, listen." You are buying a 19% share in something that's worth 15% less than we originally said it was. Therefore, if you get to the same outcome in 10 years that we've projected out, which we don't see, you actually get a higher rate of return because you bought lower to sell at the same level. Is that not correct?
I guess you could do it that way, where you're like, you invest $9 billion, you're going to own it for some time period. How much are you going to sell it at the end? Now, I guess to your point, maybe it's like, you're valuing what they're selling it for at the same multiple, but that would be like the world's most basic, like you would be doing multiple analyses. You're not gonna be like, well, I'm just going to slap the P multiple call a day. Like you're probably doing a little more robust analysis. I don't know. So that's not really like how you would do this analysis.
We're fudging a little bit here. What Adler is trying to say at least is, hey, this deal is even better than we thought. So many ways to lose.
So yeah, so actually that's a good point. It's the IRR is even better for you.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. That's what I took this to mean.
Yeah, after what we know will be a mutually beneficial relationship. And Adler is just so fixated on the fact that he possibly missed this. He goes, how could I have missed this? It's sloppy, Eric. And it's like, Eric's kind of like, stop calling attention. But he's like, it's fine, Bill. It's fine. Leave it. It's late. It happens. It's just a book. But also like, Eric is totally like throwing him under the bus by like pointing it out in the first place. Adler says, that's a huge decrease in the valuation. How did I not spot it? And Eric says, Bill, you did spot it. Adler's like, what? Eric says, we ran through it about an hour ago. I raised it to you again in the bathroom just now. Adler just looks around and he's like, huh? And Eric continues and he says, you said it wasn't a deal breaker in the room, that they know what the numbers are already, which they do. We can move on. And Adler is like, that didn't happen, did it? And Eric says, and he's like, kind of like, it's not mission critical here. But again, he's being such a jackass. Adler says, no, it is. When did we discuss this? I don't think we did. I don't think we did. Did we? Maybe I'm just misremembering. And Tom says, I think you can move on. And Adler says, no, you have to understand. It's very important that I didn't misremember. And Tom says, Bill, what's going on? Eric holds his hand and says, Bill,
Eric
there's
reaches
no
over
shame.
Tenderly and grabs his hand. Yeah. When he says, hey, Bill, there's no shame.
And Bill says, I'm so sorry. It's just, I've been quite sick and I didn't want to bring it up in this forum, and Eric says, you are fit to continue. And Tom says, gentlemen and lady, could you give us 5? So the Mitsubishi guy says, this isn't what I expect in these circumstances, but I think they walk out. And so
Tom says, no, there should be multiple layers of review. My apologies. So they step out.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, what is happening here? Eric is gaslighting a terminally ill man into thinking that his brain tumor has caused him to forget hours worth of conversations and this error that's in this book. And he has now been forced to out himself as being sick in a room where you can't ever have anyone question your cognitive abilities. This is so dark and so low.
Yep. And so Adler apologizes and says he should have breezed past it, but it's quite important for his prognosis. Tom asks what's wrong with him, and Adler says, I have a malignant tumor, but I haven't noticed much, if any, cognitive impairment, which is why, and then they say, you've been keeping this to yourself. You shouldn't be in here. Your health is of paramount importance, like they care about his health. Adler says, my performance has never been compromised. And Tom says, apart from when it just mattered. High stress, no sleep. This isn't the place for a sick man. Look, I want you to go home. This isn't a suggestion. And Bill is like tearing up and he says, I'm fit to work if I say I'm fit to work. And Tom says, I want you to go rest. Wilhelmina then says, Eric, why don't you go put Bill in a cab? And Eric gets up to walk him out.
It's like that meme of like, okay, grandma, let's get you to bed. You know?
Yeah. So next scene, we're back with Yaz, and she calls Denise, says she slept on it, and she does not want to take Rose's offer. And Denise asks, have you stopped to think about what this will do to the victims? And Yaz just is now screaming. She says, of course I thought about the victims, Denise, but you have to understand it's them or it's me. Rob comes out of a house and it's like raining, hops in the car.
He's in the office
of the Little Labs. He says that the company had their funding from the university cut off. They balked at commercial applications, only lab condition trials for mental disorders. And Yaz is like, why? Rob says it's illegal. And he says that Little Labs still wants to pursue it and be the first mover. He says, imagine being first in cannabis in California. And so Yaz is like apologizing. And Robert says, no, they want to move to Silicon Valley. And they said that if I can help unlock some VC dollars, that I would get head of business development. So Yaz asks, does this mean that you'd be moving to the States? And he says, maybe. And he puts a Little Labs hat on Yaz's head, kind of being like, maybe you can come with me and we'll like live out the dream together in the US. So next scene, we're back with Adler and Eric. And Adler says that he'll get some sleep and he'll come back in. Eric says, stay home for yourself. Adler says he'll smooth things over with Mitsubishi. And Eric says, peer-to-peer, stay home. More time with your family. The institution doesn't suffer. And that goes back to, was it season 1?
This is in the season finale of all of our prior seasons. So in the in the final episode of season 1, episode 8, Reduction in Force, when Eric pulls his whole power play to oust Daria and come back through Harper and Adler, Adler says to Harper, this is an isolated issue. We work things out peer to peer. The institution doesn't suffer. Then, and by the way, at that point, Harper and Eric are at odds. So they're staring at each other being like, is this guy serious? Okay. Yeah. And Adler says, work it out. You're both salespeople, for God's sake. Okay. Yeah. Then in season 2, episode 8, when Harper and Eric pull their big surprise coup over DVD, right? They say these same lines again to Adler about the fact that there was this sexual harasser of Nicole, whom the institution was covering up, right? And Harper's like, I have this ace card up my sleeve. Now you have to keep me and blah, blah, blah. But remember, Adler told Eric when he sidelined him to senior relationship management that he should go spend more time with his family. So in that episode, when Eric and Harper ambush Adler, Eric says, all I'm saying is, let's work this out peer to peer. And Harper says the institution doesn't suffer. And again, that's when she's leveraging that threat of Nicole and her sexual harassment. So now we finally have Eric not only saying Adler's best lines back to him, but Eric has fully completed his descent or transformation or whatever into the same kind of monster that Harper became. The teacher has become the student, has become the teacher once more, right? I mean, this is 100% on purpose. Like this wasn't an accident or anything like that. And Adler is looking at the elevator, hears this and realizes that Eric backstabbed him, that he totally gaslit him. He realized, it's like this moment where he realizes that Eric was the killer all along, right? Yeah. And he says, you made me distrust my own. And then he says, for what? And he looks like he's about to cry as the doors close. And we get this moment where we see Eric. He takes a deep breath. He turns on his heel and walks back. So Eric has fully accepted what he was willing to just do to this man. And again, Adler's no saint by any stretch of the imagination, but this is pretty bad stuff.
Yes. So the next scene, we're with Harper, who's outside. You see her looking at her Bloomberg app and her Pierpoint stock price. And someone slows down a car because the car is driving by. A man hops out and he says, you Harper Stern? Otto wants to see you. Get in the car. Harper's like, now? The guy goes, you'd prefer it. She sort of slowly takes a drag of her cigarette and then she hops in. Now, from here
By the way, I'm like afraid for her safety. This is like how Vinay came to Rishi's place of work. I was like, are they going to put a bag over her head? Like I was like, what are they going to do? Is Otto Moston going to kill Harper? Is that how the season's going to end? Like, oh my God.
So from here, we then go back to the Pierpoint war room and Eric sits back down. Tom says, I hope he's getting
at the head of the table.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. So
Tom
Eric sits down.
and Wilhelmina are over on the side. Adler had been at the head of the table running the meeting. So now Eric has killed the king and is now stepping into his shoes at the seat at the head of the table.
And so Tom says, I hope he's getting the care he needs. I've heard that tumors can have certain neurological defects that pertain to people's willingness to take risk. Wilhelmina says, while I take some responsibility for my bullishness on ESG as a concept, Bill had the underlying relationship with Debt Syndicate from his bond trading days. He was the one pushing their appetite for risk. And Eric is like, yeah, fixed income was more Bill's background. Basically, like they're all deciding they're going to throw Bill Adler under the bus. And Eric is like, yes, I will play ball.
Back to Rose, by the way, who's like, oh, we can't just pin this on a dead guy. There's literally a dying man, and they're saying, why don't we, instead of pinning all of the ESG failures on Wilhelmina,
who did it?
And by the way, this whole thing of like, oh yeah, Bill's a bond guy. Like you're not, Eric, by the way. Yeah. Like, don't even get me started how you talked about your days on the bond trading desk at Lehman Brothers back in the days. But anyways, like neither here nor there. Yep. I mean, this is just...
So Tom says we can't let someone go because of their declining health. But Eric, as the closest to him, if you think an indefinite period of absence would be in his best interest, it is something our executive committee would be willing to consider. And Eric says he seemed a little out of sorts, which by the way, like actually he has, but I mean, he has.
Eric acts like he's just coming to this realization. Like,
oh yeah.
Oh,
like I didn't know that he had a tumor and I didn't know this all along. Philip says, well, I respect the rules of the game. I find, and by the way, Philip, the guy who was actually the one who's like this dumb ESG bullshit, like whatever. But then he's the one who has like the moral like compass a little bit. He says, well, I respect the rules of the game. I find pinning this all on a sick man morally unconscionable. But tomorrow's more important than yesterday for Pierpoint. And so they all look around and Tom says, so fuck him then, right? As he like takes a bite of something. And then he says, is Mitsubishi worth pursuing? And Eric says, it's a Band-Aid. Philip was onto something when he told us we should be looking towards the Gulf. So I brokered an introduction. And then Ali, the one who was on the desk, like he was the one who was speaking in Egyptian Arabic. We didn't know his name, blah, blah, blah. He walks in and Eric says, Ali, it's Pierpoint's anniversary. How would you like to buy a piece of history?
And he is flanked by this room of men in suits. So it's very clear that this Gulf money is coming in. Now, of course, having told the whole story of Barclays buying Lehman after they went bankrupt, the only missing piece in that story is how Barclays then had to be bailed out just a month later by Gulf money. So if you'll recall, like literally basically like the day I showed up at Barclays, we then had to be bailed out. So Qatar and Abu Dhabi then rescued us in like October, November. So no one was like out of the woods, right? And Barclays didn't get hurt money and they weren't an American bank, right? So basically they tried to do this like further round of capital raising and Qatar ended up buying a 12.7% stake in Barclays, and the International Petroleum Investment Company, IPIC, I think that's what that stands for, they invested something like another $5 billion in instruments, giving them a 16% stake. So this is that Gulf money coming in and rescuing the Barclays, Lehman, everybody. Now, it feels like more of a salient storyline in 2025, 24 when this aired than it would have in 08, right? It didn't have that same ring where now this is something that we see so much more of and they're always part of the headlines and whatever. But this is tale as old as time. And like this actually did happen where the Gulf came in and rescued Barclays after they bought Lehman. So like, you can imagine too, I'm like sitting there, I'm like, not again. Like,
I just got my job, for God's sake.
I just got a job. Like, we didn't bail out again. But listen, this was, I mean, A++. And like, you didn't even mention, I mean, the Rage Against the Machine song playing as like they come in the door and like Eric pulling off this masterful coup.
I have been so excited for you to watch this episode because we've talked about how I had watched through season 3 and Jen has been watching in real time. And I remember when I watched this and I was like, Jen, I can't wait for you to get to this episode. I am so excited. So this, by the way, we have broke a record, 3.5 hours. We will see how long it is when this all shakes out. We can quickly do bullish and bearish. I mean, I am bullish on, seems like Eric right now.
Yep.
And I am bearish on Harper because she seems like she's about to like possibly be killed off, but like, you know.
Also, for the first time, I'm actually bullish on Robert because it seems like he's finally going to get out of the world of industry and he's going to go off to VC land and a startup and like have a nice life in California, right? Which is,
he seems like he belongs there.
Best case scenario for sweet little Robert, who did not belong in the world of industry whatsoever. Yasmin, I'm bearish on. Harper, I'm like worried for her safety.
Yeah. We're still kind of worried for Rishi's safety because Vinay is still after him.
Yes, yes. So I'm so excited to tackle the season finale because during the whole Lumi plotline, I was like, people are talking about this is the best season of any show. Like, what's happening? And now I'm like, I'm so bought in. I love this so much between the Rishi episode, the like Harper starting a hedge fund, the Rishi episode, and this episode. And the one immediately before this, which I like forgot to mention.
It's so funny. I saw Liquidity commented something that was like, I don't even know what this show's about anymore. And then someone else goes, there's no finance in season 3. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There is like finance up the wazoo. So There's so much like really cool stuff coming up. If you are listening on the main feed, if you are listening on the industry pod, welcome. Thank you for being here. We are starting a separate Instagram account dedicated to the podcast. I think we have like 3 followers right now, but we will be starting to post some dedicated content there just because I assume a lot of people that are interested in industry don't necessarily give a shit about like all the other random stuff that we post in terms of like, what is the one year forward rate on, or like is the, sorry, maybe
you want to understand episode 1 of season 1 of industry, you better know what the 1 year forward rate is. But guys, thank you so much for all your support. We are so freaking pumped. We will be caught up by the time season 4, episode 1 premieres on Sunday, January 11th. So use us to binge, enjoy. We'll see you next time.
Bye.